Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to day 3 of the August 2025 meeting of the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. We are joined today by and we're going to be in joint session for all of today, with the exception of just a few minutes in our last agenda item. But we're going to be in joint session with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission's Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Board. Nicola Meserve from Massachusetts is the Summer Flounder, Scup, Black Sea Bass Board Chair, so she will be joining me and co-chairing with me as we navigate through spec setting for all 3 species over the course of the next few hours. We're going to start our meeting this morning discussing 2026 through 2027 summer flounder specifications. So that's the first item that we have to take up today. We have an hour and a half or so. Hannah and Chelsea are here from Council and Commission staff, and I'm going to turn things over to them to let them run us through the presentation whenever you guys are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And since I made up time for Blue Line the other day, I'm going to take that back today. So as the chairman said, we'll be discussing summer flounder specifications for the next 2 years. So similar to Bluefish, we'll walk through a similar presentation. First, we'll go over the recent management track assessment. Then we'll get into recent fishery performance. And I'll have a couple slides on the advisory panel inputs, and then go into the SSC and monitoring committee recommendations. And then we'll review commercial measures. And the overall objectives for today are to adopt recommendations for the next 2 years, the different catch and landing limits. So ACLs, ACTs, the commercial quota, and the recreational harvest limit. And then also review commercial measures and recommend any changes if warranted. So a management track assessment was completed for summer flounder earlier this summer. Based on this assessment, the stock was not overfished in 2024, and spawning stock biomass was about 83% of the biomass target. And unlike the previous assessment completed in 2023, in 2024 for summer flounder, overfishing was also not occurring. The fishing mortality was about 76% of the threshold. So these figures are pulled directly from the assessment report, on the left showing spawning stock biomass, which, as you can see, is above the threshold, which is this dotted line or dashed line here, which indicates the stock was not overfished. But for summer flounder, we're still below the target, which is that solid gray line at the top. Then on the right, we have the graph showing fishing mortality, which, as you can see, dips down in 2024 compared to 2022 and 2023, indicating that in 2024, summer flounder was not experiencing overfishing, and that dashed line again is the threshold. Also from the assessment report, this figure shows recruitment over the years. As you can see, recruitment has been variable over the years, but in the more recent years, recruitment has been generally lower than what we saw in years prior to 2011. Compared to post-2010 years, there does appear to be a slight increase in recruits in 2023 and 2024, but we're still mostly below that pre-2011 average. Getting into fishery performance, this table shows OFL and ABC performance. In the second column, total catch includes dead discards, and that total catch calculation uses the older MRIP series prior to 2019, and then starting in 2019 later uses the most recent calibration of MRIP. Summer flounder has not exceeded the OFL or ABC in recent years, but in 2016 and 2017, there were minor ABC overages driven largely by larger than expected dead discards. Here we have commercial and recreational landings and discards. Commercial landings are in blue. As you can see, they started trending down in about 2011 and reached a time series low in 2017, and since then have steadily increased, with the exception of 2024, which was likely more of a factor of the low quota. Recreational landings are shown here in green, generally declining also since 2013, however. And just to note, the full MRIP time series here is reflected of the most recent calibrated number, so different than the table I showed on the previous slide. And then dead discards are the bottom two lines, commercials in red and recreationals in purple. Dead discards for both sectors have been pretty stable in recent years, with both sectors seeing a slight decreasing trend since 2010. So focusing a little bit more on commercial fishery performance, this table shows commercial performance since 2015 relative to the commercial quota and ACL. And as you can see, commercial overages have not occurred often in recent years. And in few years where there has been commercial ACL overages, those were mostly driven by larger than expected dead discards. And in 2024, there was a minor overage by about 3% of the commercial quota and 1% to the commercial ACL. But as you can see, and as I noted on the previous slide, the commercial fishery was operating off of a much smaller quota and ACL, likely attributing to that minor overage. So getting into commercial value and price, this figure shows summer flounder total ex-vessel revenue in the reddish orangish dashed line from 1996 through 2024, which as you can see has ranged from a low of $26 million in 1996 to $43 million in 2005. The mean price per pound is the green line, ranging from a low of $2.18 in 2023 to a high of $5.23 in 2017. You can see that average price per pound has steadily declined since the high in 2017, with the exception of 2024, where we actually saw a fairly large increase. Landed weight is shown in blue, and similar to the last slide or the previous two slides, we do see a declining trend since 2018, or sorry, an increasing trend since 2018, followed by the decline in 2024. In 2024 specifically, 9 million pounds of summer flounder were landed, generating $28.6 million in total ex-vessel revenue at an average of $3.22, which interestingly enough, in 2023, although we landed more summer flounder, that compared to 2024, the same revenue, total ex-vessel revenue was it was worth the same total amount, and then the average price per pound was much higher in 2024 compared to 2023. As for the recreational fishery performance, similar to the commercial sector, overages have not been common over the past decade, and the recreational sector has not exceeded the RHL or the ACL since 2020. So as we do every year, we met with our advisory panel this summer to develop our fishery performance report, asking them a series of trigger questions to get their on the water perspective, as well as any additional feedback they wanted to provide. During this meeting, there was some discussion that applied to both summer flounder as well as the other two species, so scup and black sea bass, which highlighted here was primarily related to this idea of implementing a total length limit. We have received this recommendation in the past from one of our advisors, but this year the recommendation stirred up some additional discussion. And just as a reminder, under this total length limit system, the idea is that anglers would retain all the fish until a specified cumulative length is reached, and then it has the intent of eliminating dead discards completely or discards entirely. This advisor questioned why the recreational sector has long tolerated dead discards and noted a draft preliminary analysis that was shared with him that modeled the impacts of the total length limit approach. So because of this, it stirred up some discussion amongst advisors. Two advisors were skeptical of the approach and noted that although it may sound good in theory, they noted the potential enforcement challenge associated with this idea, concerns with anglers potentially high grading, and the overall angler reluctance to retain very small fish that would yield very little fillet. These advisors also noted that current common recreational practices already include using larger hooks and jigs and often still catch smaller fish. So simply changing out their gear would not avoid the smaller fish that they don't want to keep. One advisor, however, in addition to the gentleman that recommended this, did note support for some components of the total length limit approach. This advisor thought that this approach could work in a structured environment, such as a charter or headboat, where crew could track the total length limit per customer and avoid high grading behavior. This advisor also noted that while they were supportive of not supportive of keeping very small fish, and this advisor specifically mentioned a 10-inch summer flounder, he would support retaining larger fish that are not currently the legal size limit as opposed to discarding them potentially dead. And he said that this would allow for more opportunity to retain fish since some trips they're catching very little to none keeper size. They also noted that the total length limit, if it was implemented on the for-hire fleet, it would be less of an enforcement concern. So focusing now just on summer flounder comments, several advisors highlighted observing an abundance of smaller summer flounder, but not seeing a lot of keeper size or larger fish. One advisor particularly noted not seeing this high level of abundance of small summer flounder in many years and was optimistic that this was a good sign for the future. Several noted that the recreational summer flounder fishing started off slow off of Long Island, New Jersey, Connecticut, and around Barnegat Bay, and that they attributed this slow start to colder than normal water temperatures. One advisor expressed concern that the current commercial minimum size limit disproportionately targets females, contributing to reduction in stock diversity and resilience. There were also some comments specific to the commercial fishery. An advisor from New Jersey noted that there is not a lot of directed commercial fishing of summer flounder where he particularly fishes, but last year he noted that the price was very good to even excellent during parts of the year. A commercial advisor from Rhode Island reported that commercial landings have been down and described his local waters as a dead ocean, noting a general absence of marine life, including summer flounder. And then another advisor highlighted that some commercial vessels have shifted their fishing northward, but are returning to ports in North Carolina and Virginia where the trip limits are more favorable. This advisor also noted that the price appears to be relatively similar for both the large and jumbo size fish. For the recreational fishery, multiple advisors noted that, as I mentioned earlier, summer flounder were not observed in high abundance last year. They also described this year as a slow start with few legal size fish being caught, but they did report seeing an abundance of summer flounder between 12 and 16 inches. And then advisors from, again, Connecticut, New Jersey, and around Barnegat Bay also noted that they are just starting to see fluke show up inshore this year. And this was during the summer. I think we had our AP meeting late June. Then there was one research recommendation. One advisor noted that some of the smaller summer flounder caught in the southern part of the management unit may be southern flounder, as they appear to be moving northward into the Chesapeake Bay, and in some years as far north as Delaware and New Jersey. And this advisor suggested biological sampling be conducted specifically to count gill rakers to properly identify southern versus summer flounder caught in these areas. We also had a few comments after the meeting through phone and email. One advisor noted that in 2024, inshore fishing was slow and recreational anglers in Rhode Island were rather unhappy about it, but offshore fishing was okay, but not at all spectacular. And then this advisor noted that the average price per pound was about $3 a pound. And then another advisor requested staff show F over MSY from the most recent management track assessment in relation to the OFL and ABC, specifically related to overages to help illustrate if OFL and ABC overages was at all contributing to overfishing. For summer flounder, we don't have consistent OFL and ABC overages like we do for some of the other species. So this table might not be as informative, but I still thought it was interesting and wanted to show it on the screen. And then at this point, if Paul Rago, you're online, I will turn it over to you for the SSC report.
Okay, thank you very much, Hannah. Yes, I'll just repeat a little bit of information here. The stock's no overfish and overfishing is not occurring. And this was a change from the previous assessment in which overfishing was occurring in 2022. So the current model performs very well and has a nominal retrospective pattern. I'll talk a little bit more about its performance in a following slide. Of course, looming over all of our assessments is the potential effects of the recalibrated MRIP catch estimates. And we speculated a little bit yesterday on those factors, and just to add a little more to it, the implications for historical estimates of fishing mortality are not as easy to summarize as the simple rescaling of abundance and the rescaling of reference points. What that means is if the stock estimates are rescaled downward, the fishing mortality attributed to commercial fishing, those estimates are not revised. And so in general, they will be higher than previously estimated, and the overall fishing mortality rate could be higher than previously estimated. So that's kind of a general concern that the SSC wished to convey. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of a graphic here showing the process by which the assignment of the OFL-CV affects the derived ABCs. And what is shown in the graph here is the change in the from the OFL to the ABC, and the SSC assigned a CV of 60%, which is its lowest value based on simulation studies. And that results in an overall reduction of 7%. That column on the upper right-hand corner there that's labeled OFL, that should be an ABC. I apologize for that correction there. But anyhow, the values go, there were two scenarios considered. One was a variable, time varying, so to speak, ABC, and the second was a desire for additional constancy, which is the time invariant or constant one. So as before, the magnitude of change from the OFL to the ABC is determined first by the magnitude of the assigned OFL, where the current stock size is. It's 82% of BMSY, and then finally by the risk policy, the threshold tolerance for overfishing, and that is 0.45. A little bit of background. Next slide, please. Next slide gives you a little bit of insight into the scorecard that's used, so to speak, for assigning the overall level of uncertainty. There are 6 different factors considered. Data, the model, performance, and retrospective pattern constitute what we call tier 1. These are the primary influences on the overall estimate of uncertainty. These are followed by 3 additional factors, which include empirical comparisons, consideration of ecosystem factors, and then recruitment. So each of these factors and additional details are provided in the appendix. Overall, I just wanted to emphasize this assessment is really kind of a flagship for the assessments within the Mid-Atlantic process. The model performs well. It has a huge data set that supports the assessment with multiple perspectives on relative abundance, and it has a very low retrospective pattern. The model also compares well with other empirical measures of relative abundance, such as swept area biomass. Ecosystem factors have been included or have not been included in the model, but have been explored. And then finally, the recruitment stanza used for projection uses the last 14 years, not the entire time series. And of course, what this means is some evidence of non-stationarity. And by that, I mean that it appears that the most recent stanza, the last 14 years, may constitute a new state of nature, so to speak. So we may not expect to see those high values again. And hopefully Mother Nature will contradict that in some way. But this, of course, is one of the factors that is built into the assessment model. So the overall CV was 60%. Next slide, please. Okay, the uncertainty measures are related to the recreational catch and discard, and especially in years where some of those data were imputed because of COVID-related factors. There does, as I mentioned, there does seem to be some potential change in productivity, and this will affect the biological reference points. In addition to the recruitment changes, there have been changes, modest changes, or less dramatic changes than from some other stocks in terms of the size at age, the estimated rate of growth as well. There are some changes, as AP advisors and others have noted. There may be some changes in availability of the fish to some of the surveys, and of course this affects the magnitude of the estimated trends within those surveys. And then I mentioned the concerns about the MRIP calibrations so earlier. So next slide, please. The ecosystem factors, it does have what's called a moderate vulnerability based on the climate vulnerability assessment, and the early life stages, of course, are in habitat with high vulnerability. So when you're inshore and it's hot in the summer, that cannot always be a good thing. As noted before, the 2018 benchmark did a lot of work on potential causal factors, but none of those were considered significant. In terms of research recommendations, the SSC expressed some interest. Next slide, please. They, recommended the continued widespread monitoring of the species to support all the management process, and that includes the state surveys as well. The further studies to investigate the biological responses to fishing, such as its age structure, weighted age, and other life history consequences were encouraged. We really don't have a strong understanding of the overall recruitment process. So that's true for all stocks, but in particular here, we have a lot of different pictures, so to speak, of that process. So there's an opportunity to investigate that further. So as mentioned, these changes in distribution and movement, do influence the realized survey estimates. If they're in a different place when the survey typically occurs, or if the timing of the surveys has changed, then that does have an influence on our perception of the stock. Historically, there were a lot of analyses related to differences between males and females. It was thought that, continued investigation of this would be useful. And one of the key parts of that would be collection of sex-specific fishery-dependent data. So it's sex-specific data is collected in many of the surveys, but not routinely collected within the fishery. So that concludes the SSC's recommendations. I'll turn it back to you, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Rago. So after the SSC met, the monitoring committee met to discuss catch and landing limits as a result of the SSC recommended ABC. And this flow chart shown here is how we get from the OFL and ABC to the sector-specific catch and landing limits. For summer flounder, the allocation was revised to a catch-based allocation in 2021, and where 55% of the ABC is allocated to the commercial fishery as a commercial ACL and 45% to the recreational fishery. From there, the monitoring committee then recommends if they want to recommend a management uncertainty buffer, which would then be subtracted from the ACL to derive the ACTs. And then from the ACTs, the monitoring committee recommends an approach to project dead discards, which then are subtracted to derive the commercial quota and the recreational harvest limit, or RHL. So over the next several slides, I'll kind of get into the monitoring committee discussions. But before I kind of go step by step through the flow chart, I wanted to highlight that the monitoring committee had a lengthy discussion related to this figure shown here. This figure is from the council staff memo that shows the ABC in each year since 2011 as a % difference compared to the year prior. And where you see 0% change, those are the years where the council and board adopted a constant ABC over a 2-year period. So whatever was in place the year prior was in place that following year. This figure was originally developed as part of the rationale for the original staff recommended lower ABC. So similar to bluefish, there was a staff recommended ABC that was lower than what came from the projections. And the staff recommended ABC was based on the 5-year most recent ABC average, so 2022 to 2025. And just to note, those ABCs captures years where we saw an increase to the ABC as well as a decline. So it kind of captured like the middle ground. During the monitoring committee meeting, the group was concerned with this large volatility in the summer flounder ABC over the years and highlighted that these large increases in the ABC, like the one recommended for 2025 or 2026 and 2027, are often followed by a sharp decrease like what we saw in 2024. And during this discussion, the monitoring committee emphasized the importance of maintaining quota stability and ensuring that the specification process remains responsive to uncertainty and stock dynamics without overcorrecting from one specification cycle to the next. So during the monitoring committee, there was also expressed reservation around the stock projections used to inform the ABC, particularly around summer flounder recruitment and the variability that we've seen over the past several decades. So this is similar to the figure I showed earlier, just as a bar graph. They discussed that the projections are based off a shortened recruitment time series, as Dr. Rago mentioned, from 2011 to 2024, which are highlighted in the green bars here, and noted that during this shortened time series, recruitment has been consistently below the long-term average, which is shown as that pink line at the top with the asterisks. And for comparative purposes, you can see the average recruitment for this shortened time series as the blue dashed line. The monitoring committee also noted that while in 2023 and 2024, recruitment appears to be stronger than in prior years, in the shortened time series, given the persistent below average recruitment, there was concern that if this recent increase is reflective of a meaningful shift in stock productivity or merely a short-term fluctuation at it appears like we have seen in the past. And they noted that the stock has yet to demonstrate a consistent return to higher recruitment levels. The monitoring committee also brought up the 2018 recruitment estimate and how following the 2021 management track assessment, it was initially estimated to be well above average levels as shown by this red dot on the slide, but in later assessments was shown to be not nearly as strong as originally predicted, which is shown as the pink bar. So there was a difference of about, I think, 20 million recruits between the 21 management track assessment and the later assessments. This group also noted the persistent minor retrospective pattern in the summer flounder model and how that contributed to the ABC decrease following the 2023 management track assessment. So that large decrease we saw in 2024 and held consistent through 2025. So given these concerns and this theme of ensuring fishery stability and avoid overcorrecting from one specification cycle to the next, the monitoring committee discussed where in the flow chart it may be appropriate to apply some level of precaution. They talked about two options. The first was applying a buffer between the OFL and ABC as originally proposed in the staff memo. And then the second was applying it as a management uncertainty buffer between the sector-specific ACLs and ACTs, which was noted that as the more traditional approach for the monitoring committee when in the past they've had these discussions on management uncertainty. During the meeting, there was also discussion about the summer flounder regulations that requires the monitoring committee to recommend sector-specific ACLs that sum to the SSC recommended ABC. And it was also highlighted that recommending a buffer at the ACT level also has the advantage of providing an additional buffer before accountability measures are triggered, since those are triggered when the sector exceeds the ACL. So given the full discussion and the regulations specified in the summer flounder rule, the monitoring committee ultimately recommended a buffer at the ACT, and I'll get into those details in just a few slides. So getting back to the flow chart, the calculation of the ACL is relatively straightforward and is based on the allocations defined in the FMP. For summer flounder, as I mentioned, 55% of the ABC goes to the commercial ACL and 45% to the recreational. Shown here is what the ACL would be under the varying and constant ABC approach. As Dr. Rago mentioned, the SSC recommended both to give the council and board the option, but the monitoring committee discussed these two approaches and ultimately recommended the constant approach, which is highlighted here in yellow, since it would hold the catch and landing limits consistent for 2 consecutive years, and it adds to predictability and stability and is consistent with what they have recommended and what this body has recommended in the recent past. So as I noted earlier, given the monitoring committee's discussions related to uncertainty, the monitoring committee ultimately recommended applying a buffer between the sector-specific ACLs and ACTs to account for management uncertainty. And I attempted to summarize those concerns that I discussed earlier in the sub-bullets here. The monitoring committee specifically recommended a 12% buffer be applied to both sectors. This 12% came from the original staff recommendation outlined in the staff memo, and the resulting ACTs would essentially sum up to be the average 5-year ABC, so from 2021 through 2025. And as outlined in the staff memo, the monitoring committee agreed that this approach would help maintain quota stability and while still allowing for an increase in harvest opportunities. So just focusing on the constant ABC, this would result in a commercial ACT of 14.52 million pounds and a recreational ACT of 11.88 million pounds. And I do have the numbers available for the varying approach if of interest to this group. The monitoring committee also discussed an approach to project commercial and recreational dead discards to be subtracted from the sector-specific ACTs to derive the commercial quota and RHL. The monitoring committee ultimately agreed with the staff recommended approach, which looks at the most recent 3-year average proportion of sector-specific dead discards from the recent management track assessment relative to the sector-specific catch. However, given their recommendation for a management uncertainty buffer, they they instead recommended applying this proportion to the ACT before that management uncertainty buffer is applied, as opposed to the ACL. So looking at 2022 through 2024, which is that most recent 3-year average, 26% of recreational discards accounts for 26% of total recreational catch. So when applying that to the ACT, that would result in a dead discard estimate of about 3.09 million pounds. And then for the commercial sector, 12% of commercial dead discards accounts for total commercial catch. When applied to the ACT, would account for about 1.74 million pounds of estimated dead discards. And it is important to note that this approach does shift a larger proportion of catch to landings compared to the previous approach, which looking at recent trends may be appropriate. So this slide just shows the discards we projected in that second column compared to estimated or realized discards from the management track assessment. And as you can see, we've been over projecting discards for summer flounder for in many of the years. So shifting some of those to landings for the next cycle may be appropriate. And then this here, we have the recreational sector. You can see a similar pattern, if not more so. And there are some years where we've significantly overestimated discards for both the commercial and recreational sector. So with that, taking the OFL and the SSC recommended ABC and following those steps that we just went over the past several slides, under the constant ABC approach, this would result in a commercial quota of 12.78 million pounds and an RHL of 8.79 million pounds in 2026 and 2027, which even with the additional management uncertainty buffer, this results in a 45% increase to the commercial quota and a 38% increase to the RHL. And then here we have the same information under the varying ABC approach. Again, this approach was not recommended by the monitoring committee, but given the SSC recommendation is still a potential option under consideration today. So during the monitoring committee, there was also discussion regarding the percent change approach that we anticipate going through later this year to set 2026 through 2027 recreational measures. And it was highlighted that although we still at this point don't know where summer flounder will land in this first column, we do, however, based on the most recent management track assessment, know that summer flounder will fall into this low biomass level since the most recent management track assessment, we're at 83% of the target. So regardless of how high we see the RHL increase, if you carry over this low biomass level to the third column, for summer flounder will either fall in a 0% change or possibly some level of reduction in harvest. So as you could imagine, the monitoring committee discussion stirred up quite a bit of public comment, several focused on the percent change approach in the scenario I highlighted on the previous slide related to recreational measures for 2026 and 2027. One advisor specifically questioned if this type of scenario was anticipated during the development of the framework and addenda. This advisor also expressed concern associated with the current measure serving as the baseline for estimating future harvests compared to the RHL. This advisor noted that current measures are a result of cycles of liberalization and reductions, and because of that, do not serve as an appropriate starting point as they have been gradually degraded over time. And this advisor argued that this whittling down of measures has created a problematic scenario in which the status quo measures now being carried forward under the percent change approach may no longer align with the current stock condition or fishery realities. During this meeting, staff clarified that the percent change approach was explicitly designed to promote stability in recreational regulations and avoid liberalizing measures when stock status is below the target. While this specific scenario, like what we see for the summer flounder current situation, was not explicitly discussed, it is consistent with the intent of the action. And then staff also explained the idea of considering the starting point or baseline for the percent change approach in measures had been discussed during the action, but not pursued due to its complexity. Additionally, during the monitoring committee, a board member requested that implications of the percent change approach be clearly communicated to the council and board as well as the public, and emphasized that after this meeting, people should not leave with the impression that measures would significantly change even with an increase to the RHL. This board member highlighted that a 0% change in harvest as outlined in the percent change approach doesn't necessarily mean no change to measures, and requested staff in the monitoring committee recognize that minor adjustments to bag size limits and seasons could still be evaluated and potentially implemented if they resulted in no net change in harvest. And this board member advocated for the RDM to be made available as soon as possible, so states have the ability to analyze these and implement such, or see if such changes to the measures would comply with the potential 0% change in harvest sooner rather than later. And then lastly, an additional board member questioned if the percent change approach requires use of the terminal year SSB estimated from the most recent management track assessment, and requested that if possible, the monitoring committee consider using projected future SSB instead. During the meeting, there was also a request from an advisor urging the monitoring committee to consider implementing a total length limit from the recreational sector. This advisor expressed frustration that this idea is being overlooked and in the discussion, and noted that implementing a total length limit could protect the larger fecund females and benefit stock productivity, unlike current regulations. And then another advisor expressed concern with the direction of the monitoring committee discussion, particularly regarding scientific versus management uncertainty. The advisor noted that scientific uncertainty is the responsibility of the SSC, and they did not think it was appropriate for the monitoring committee to weigh in on this. The advisor also noted that it appeared as if some monitoring committee members supported the lower catch and landing limits based on the perceived fairness between sectors. So this situation where the commercial sector would get a large increase due to the quota increase, but liberalization to rec measures would be constrained due to the percent change approach. And then this advisor didn't feel that such rationale was valid and outside of the scope of the monitoring committee. And the advisor also argued that market conditions such as declining prices when the quotas rise was also not an appropriate justification for policy decisions. So last thing to review here, I promise, and switching gears a little bit, moving into commercial measures, the monitoring committee also recommended no change to the current commercial minimum fish size, which is currently 14 inches for summer flounder, or the seasonal possession limits targeting or triggering the minimum mesh requirement, which is currently 200 pounds of summer flounder from November through April and 100 pounds from May through October. For summer flounder, we also have 2 minimum mesh exemption programs that the monitoring committee reviews each year. As a reminder, this group recently recommended changes to these programs. So this is first the small mesh exemption program. This exemption allows authorized vessels using small mesh to land more than 200 pounds of summer flounder when operating in the small mesh exempted area from November through April, as well as the fly net exemption, which exempts vessels using a fly net from the minimum mesh requirements. The council and board took final action on several modifications to these programs that are pending federal rulemaking, and if all goes according to plan, they are expected to be implemented later this year, so fingers crossed there. These revisions included modifications to the small mesh exemption program area, as well as the annual review methodology, as well, and then also modifications to the regulatory definition of the fly net. For the small mesh exemption area revision, this figure shows the proposed revisions approved by the council and board, with the solid green in these maps representing the previous, or I guess current small mesh exemption area. And then the hash green area is what was approved through the recent framework action. For the sake of time, I won't rehash all the details, but just as a reminder, even though it appears like this area was expanded largely because of the overlap with the deep sea coral zone, which is the darker green here, it was really just a minor increase to the area. And through this action, no changes were made to the requirement to get a letter of authorization to participate in the program or the timing of the exemption. Another proposed change, as I mentioned, was the review methodology. So this changed the trigger percentage when analyzing discards of summer flounder through this exemption from 10 to 25%. This is reviewed every year, and we're looking at summer flounder discards compared to summer flounder catch on these trips. Additionally, through this modification, if the 25% trigger was exceeded, it would instead promote a more in-depth review of the exemption discards to better understand what is driving these higher than expected discards rather than serving as the primary trigger to rescind the exemption. For the remainder of the year, sorry. So just thinking about the modifications to the review methodology, this shows how many vessels participated in the small mesh exemption program each year since 2013. As you can see, it's remained relatively stable over the years, and looking at the past decade, on average, 68 vessels have participated each year. In the most recent seasons, so the 2023 through 2024 season, 75 vessels were issued an LOA, and in the most recent season, so 2024 through 2025, 72 vessels participated. Then to evaluate the associated discards, staff looked at observer data, specifically from these LOA trips from the most recent small mesh exemption program seasons. So again, from November through April each year starting in 2023. Across the most recent 2 years, a total number of trips observed were 244 trips, and of those trips, 130 used the smaller mesh or smaller than the minimum mesh requirement. So using these 130 trips to kind of base the analysis off of the small trips, as you can see on average, as well as the median, they're catching a small amount of summer flounder as well as discarding a small amount of summer flounder by weight. As these trips are not typically targeting summer flounder. It's not their primary target species. They're usually targeting something else. And just for an example, 50% of these observed trips using these small mesh gear caught less than 300 pounds of summer flounder, and on average are discarding about 100 pounds of summer flounder. So even though the total poundage is low, as a proportion, discards can be notable. But even with that, as shown in the highlighted yellow text, these observed small mesh LOA trips on average are discarding less than the 25% trigger, which would trigger a more in-depth review. So based on this, the monitoring committee did not recommend triggering a more in-depth review at this time. The discard rate observed does not appear to be exceeding that 25% trigger in the manner that would justify further investigation. And additionally, they highlighted that discard trends were recently evaluated in depth during the framework and addendum that is pending federal rulemaking. So last, for the fly net exemption, the changes proposed through the recent action were an attempt to better reflect the reality of the fly net, or also called a high-rise net type. These nets and the definition clarified that they are large meshes. They have large mesh in the wings and in the belly, which decreases throughout the body to the cod end. In the past, the monitoring committee has typically reviewed data from the North Carolina fly net fishery, as it was previously understood to be the bulk of the fly net landings. However, since 2014, there has been no reported summer flounder catch in such North Carolina nets. And so during the minimum mesh review that preceded the framework and addenda, it was also highlighted the importance of this exemption beyond North Carolina. And it was not uncommon for folks in other states to use this exemption. So given this to improve monitoring and data collection, GARFO intends to add a blind net or high-rise net gear code to the VTRs, which will serve as a future data source to analyze use of this exemption and the associated summer flounder discards. So because of these changes made to the fly net exemption and the pending federal rulemaking, an in-depth analysis and the in-depth analysis explored through the framework and addendum, the monitoring committee also recommended no changes to the fly net exemption for the next year. So with that, this slide summarizes the monitoring committee recommendations. On the left, the table showing the catch and landing limits under the constant ABC. And then, as I noted, they recommended no changes to the commercial measures. And with that, I can take any questions, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you, Dr. Rago, for your presentation. So what I'd like to do, I'll say this once because we'll do this a number of times today, but we're going to start with questions from council members and board members. And then I'd like to turn the conversation to a motion, whether it pick whatever one you'd want to make. And we'll use that as a focus to keep us on track with making sure that we walk away with specifications recommended for 2026 and beyond. So let's start with questions. And if anyone online has any questions, whether you're a member of the public or a board or council member, please raise your hand and I'll get to you as soon as I can. I've got Mike Petney first. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Hannah, for a lot of information in that presentation. So I noted that you pointed out the recent 2023 and 2024, we had better than the recent average recruitment, or slightly better than the recent average recruitment. Can you remind me or us when those fish from 2023 and 2024 will recruit to the fisheries? Noting that, the minimum sizes are different, so they might recruit at different times.
Yeah, I think for the commercial, it's like 1 or 2 years because summer flounder in their first year of life, they grow pretty quickly. And I believe they reach that size limit by like year 1, year 1.5, maybe year 2 at the latest. And I don't know if Sam or someone's online that may know better than I. But I'm looking at Kylie, who did summer flounder for many more years than I, and she's giving me some nods. So I think it's 1 to 2 years.
For the commercial, what about for the rec, given that they have higher minimum sizes?
Yeah, so I guess it would depend on what state you're talking about. If it's an 18-inch size limit, for example, probably another half year, so maybe 2.5 to 3 years, I would imagine.
All right, then just to kind of close the loop on this, so the 2023 recruitment that was good should be fully recruited by 2026, likely, and the 2024 recruitment that was also pretty good should be recruiting fully in 2026 to the commercial fishery and then starting to recruit into the recreational fishery.
Yeah, I would assume.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list, I have Jim Gilmore, and then on deck is Michelle Duval.
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks, Hannah, for the presentation. The issue of fecundity on the females was raised a few years ago, and I think the decision we made at the time, or the conclusion we got to, is that the fecundity in the females was not as important in terms of the number of females. Obviously, they were a higher fecundity, but sort of equating them to striped bass, where the fecundity is like, exponentially higher in the females. And so we kind of wrestled with the fact, should we be protecting those females? And the decision a few years ago was no, because the number was more important. So has anything changed on that, or is that still the assumption with the females?
I believe that's still the assumption. And I believe the MSC kind of looked at this because the MSC analyzed different limits and size limits and how that would benefit the stock into the future. And I believe they looked at, having certain size limits, and there wasn't much of an impact if you had the size limit lower versus higher on those females. And I'm gonna look to Kylie. Okay. But to answer your question, yes, I think that's still true.
Michelle DeVal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. I think this might actually be for Dr. Hare, but I'm sorry if I missed it, but I, noticed in the briefing memos that the Science Center is no longer going to provide projections that are split into landings and discards, and I was just curious the reasoning for that.
I mean, the reasoning is just capacity and to help us simplify our operations, but we are, working with the NRCC to reevaluate the 2026 schedule and reevaluate stock assessments going forward. So if that is an important component of the advice that we provide, we can certainly reconsider.
Chris Bat-Savage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, similar question to Mike Pentney regarding the better year classes that we've had recently. You mentioned that we were below our projected dead discards for both sectors most years, but we haven't seen any good year classes lately. Did the monitoring committee discuss the possibility of projected dead discards going up, like maybe next year and maybe a little bit more in 2027 and in these fisheries as these fish are kind of right on the edge of being, the legal size, depending on which sector, and also just maybe a higher availability fish to where you can have some trip limit overages and things like that.
We didn't dive into that. The monitoring committee, really most of our discussion was around management versus scientific uncertainty. So projected discards, we really didn't dive into. And yeah, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Adam?
Thank you very much. Two questions regarding the ABC recommendations that were in the staff memo. The first one being the 5-year average ABC. Is there any basis for that, either on historical actions that these bodies have taken or other management bodies have taken to say that the 5-year ABC average is a reasonable way to set ABCs moving forward? I'll pause there, and if you can come back to me for the second one, I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, sure thing, Adam. I'll look to staff for a question, for answer for that.
Yeah, so I can't speak to the past. The 5 years really kind of came from, if you look at, sorry, I'm gonna go through all these slides. If you look at the ABCs in the past 5 years, we've got some years where you've got a higher ABC, and then some years where it was during one of those years where we saw the sharp decline in the ABC. So the 5 years was just a way to kind of capture those two points in time, because it does seem like this ABC is jumping up and then down and then up and down. It's this repeated cycle. So it was trying to get at something that would be a little bit more stable in the middle, so that to hopefully avoid a future year where we would see a sharp decline, since that seems to be the trend with these projections, but then also still allow for increased harvest opportunity. So it essentially brings us back up to kind of those higher limits that we saw in 2020, 2019, 2021.
Adam?
So thanks for putting this slide up, and I appreciate the justification you're using now as opposed to having some historical basis of how we've done things in the past or some other body managing similarly. But this table is actually the basis for my second question. My understanding is that the ABC recommendations were based on projections that the Science Center did using a number of assumptions, and one of those assumptions was that the 2025 ABC would be fully utilized. Yet this table shows that in the last 10 years, we've only fully utilized the ABC in 2 out of those 10 years. The average underage over the last 10 years is approaching 10%. And the average underage of the last 5 years that we're now saying we're going to average the ABC over 5 years is actually a 14% underage. So I'm wondering, were projections also run, not just assuming that the ABC was going to be fully utilized, but were they also run using another 5-year average or something of what the time series reflects is actually happening in the fishery? And if not, what would be the basis for not doing so?
Hannah?
Yeah, so unfortunately, they were not run. This is something that has come up at the SSC. It didn't come up at this past meeting, I don't believe, but it has come up in the past because this trend has been persistent for several years now, or even decades. So it's something that has come up. The SSC has expressed interest in it. We've never actually moved forward with it. Maybe in the past, did they? I don't think for summer flounder, they have made that assumption for scup though. I believe it was prior to the MRIP recalibration. So it's something that they could consider and they could do. It is not what they did this year. And I believe the Science Center does have the capability to assume something other than 100% of the ABC is caught.
Nicola Mazur.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just in response to Adam, I consider what we see here for 2024 to be the most realistic, a situation for 2025, though, because we set 2-year specs for 2024 and 2025, there were a significant reduction from the prior years, which in hindsight, we have said those limits were set too high. So I do think that the 2024 could be, more indicative of the 2025 scenario myself. Thanks.
Those were both excellent questions and I think very well thought out answers. So thank you for that, everyone. I don't have any names on the list. Joe, did you still have? No. Are there any other questions to come before Bobby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 2 real quick questions. One, on the total length aspect, was any thought given to that to couple it with the minimum commercial fish size? So total length starting at 14-inch up. Is that something worth exploring? And the other question I have is what's the rationale for the 12% uncertainty buffer that's applied to both? Knowing that there is, looking at the CVs associated from the SSC with both sectors, and there's a big difference between the two. Why did the monitoring committee decide to go with basically an ad hoc number across the board?
Hannah?
So the total length limit, I'll tackle that first. Are you speaking total length limit for the commercial sector or the recreational sector?
That would be for the recreation.
Yeah, so this has come up multiple times and it came up throughout the theme of this year as well. It is something that could be considered. The monitoring committee, when the advisors spoke to it at the monitoring committee and urged them to have the discussion, we didn't really dive into the discussion like the AP did. At the AP, we did, there were some advisors that expressed concern with that idea. They thought it was good in theory, but they just think it would be hard to enforce. There'd be concerns with high grading, and they didn't see how it would actually work. And then there was one additional advisor that was supportive of it. If this body is interested in us exploring that, I think we could do that. We would probably, there was a draft analysis provided to the gentleman who recommended this as well as us council staff. So we could probably take that one step further, but that would be something that this body would have to prioritize, because I don't think we could easily analyze that as we go through the percent change approach or anything like that, because there are some limitations with the RDM and what we can and cannot analyze. And then to get at your second question, the 12% buffer really came from that original staff recommended ABC, which was that lower ABC that looked at the 5-year average ABC. So the ACTs, after implementing that 12% buffer, when you sum them, they equal that average 5-year ABC. And their rationale for having 12% across the board was just That graph I showed where the ABC jumps up and then jumps down, they're just concerned with this large, steep changes, and they didn't think that was good for stability reasons. And they think that, it seems like the projections are overcorrecting from one specification cycle to the next. So it's just to add stability across the board, across both fisheries.
Did you have a follow-up, Bobby?
Yeah, well, thanks for the clarification. It was just, this is a strange, I'm in a strange position because I'm going to argue with myself. I wholeheartedly agree with let's minimize the volatility of this, the quota that we've been in this. I've been on this roller coaster with fluke my entire career, and it's not fun. But so I there's definitely think that we need to have bounds, and we need to have, we can, minimize our expectations for increases, but also minimize the decreases. So it's something we can absorb. But also, I kind of, to me, I take it as a slap in the face when you look at one sector that is playing by the rules. We have all the information. We have as much detailed information as we possibly can, but we're going to go ahead and give you the same amount of uncertainty as one that we know is a problem. And it's just kind of rubs me the wrong way, but I can understand why we're going why the monitoring committee did what it did, and why we're going down this route. But like I say, I'm arguing 2 points against each other. In one sense, more fish is always good, but too much fish is not. I don't agree with that rapid of an increase. On the commercial side, I think if we do this, we're going to end up back in the same. We're back on the same pendulum. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I've got a few hands, and there's nothing wrong with arguing with yourself. If there is, something's wrong with me too. Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I think, Bobby's argument with himself was sort of a nice segue for, some comments that I wanted to make. I know we want to get to a motion to, finish our tasking here today. But I'm going to bring up the same thing I brought up during, the Bluefish board and committee meeting yesterday with respect to, at least on the council side of things, looking at this relationship between the optimum yield and ACL framework. So this is provided for within the national standard guidelines that, the council, it is well within its purview to consider other factors when setting an ACL that is lower than the ABC. And just to quote again, this is paragraph like F44 within the National Standard 1 guidelines, but it says an ACL or ACT could be set lower than the ABC to account for ecological, economic, and social factors, e.g. the needs of forage fish, promoting stability, which was the major focus of, the monitoring committee's discussions, which I very much appreciate. I thought it was a wonderful, robust discussion, addressing market conditions, et cetera. So we have this provision within the national standard guidelines on the council side of the house to incorporate exactly the types of things that, Robert's been talking about, that staff has outlined in the memo, the concern about, significant fluctuations in annual catch limits from year to year. And so I think, we need to use that provision appropriately. I agree with Bobby with respect to the use of management uncertainty. And I think we want to make sure we're using management uncertainty appropriately. And that's, fairly clearly described in the national standard guidelines as well. And the staff memo usually outlines that also. And I'll note that the staff didn't recommend management uncertainty, so that's uncertainty in our ability to, estimate catch, to constrain, harvest to our annual catch limits. But I think what we're talking about in terms of setting this ACL is, a buffer between the ABC recommended by the SSC, which incorporates scientific uncertainty, and our desire to provide a more stable fishery for our stakeholders. Thanks.
And Michelle, the way you just laid that out, that is the monitoring committee's recommendation at this point.
Yes, I support the monitoring committee's recommendation with respect to the overall catch. I just think that the concerns are being put into the management uncertainty bucket when they really belong in this consideration of what's the interplay between, optimum yield and the ACL framework as laid out in the National Standard 1 guidelines. Thanks.
Nicely said. Thank you. Mike Penny.
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate this conversation. And I recognize that, we're getting wrapped up in this idea of assigning management uncertainty on the fishery, and it's complicating sort of how we're moving forward on this. And I think, in fairness to the monitoring committee, they're actually in a bit of a box, and we created this box, for them. The regulations are really clear. The monitoring committee shall recommend ACLs, the sum of which shall be equal to the ABC recommended by the SFC. So the only way for the monitoring committee to endorse the staff recommendation was to create a management uncertainty buffer. Because, the staff recommendation, as Michelle pointed out, recommends an ABC lower than what the SSC recommended. And that is totally within the purview of the council as well, but it's not within the purview of the monitoring committee. So they don't have the same flexibility that the staff and that the council ultimately do. And so they kind of have to back into a way to endorse the staff recommendation or to endorse something like it. And so I think, would hope that we can kind of get past calling it a management uncertainty buffer and just look at what the intent was, which, as Michelle pointed out, was to come up with a catch recommendation that, mitigates some of these big swings we've seen and gives us a bit of an increase without, going full, taking the full increase that might be possible with the SSC ABC, and risk some of those, wide swings in the future. So thanks.
Thank you, Mike. I have two hands online. I'm going to take those two, and then when we come back after those two hands, I'm going to be asking for motion. So be thinking about what type of motion you want to make. First, I'll start with John Maniscalco, and then Matt Gates. You're on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know where I want to go, and I'm largely in agreement with both the staff and the monitoring committee, and acknowledging the fact that we want to avoid the swings. We want to see the stock recover to our biomass target. And my question is not to put Mike Penny on the spot. I just want to make sure that NOAA has what it needs to move forward with an ABC or ultimately catch limits that are ultimately more conservative than what was set by the SSC. I agree entirely with what Michelle stated. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that the commercial fishery has the ability to fully harvest whatever quota they are given. And because of the guardrails set by the percent change approach, in this instance, it's likely the recreational fishery will not be allowed to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Matt Gates.
Thanks. I just wanted to kind of speak in support of this idea of limiting the swings and particularly in the commercial allocation. I think our current allocation scheme that we have, does the opposite of stability, at least for some states. As an example, in 2024, when the quota was reduced, it dropped below the trigger, which, Connecticut faced an 80% reduction in its commercial quota in 2024. And this year, it looks like we're recommending going above that, the trigger. And Connecticut would then be looking at something like a 600% increase in our commercial quota. So that instability is causing problems in our fishery. So any of the options we choose, I'll be looking at it through the lens of kind of keeping things as stable as possible, given our current allocation scheme. Thanks.
I appreciate that, Matt. Okay, we're back now to folks in the room. There will be an opportunity for public comment after we have motions on the table. So I'm going to ask at this point, is there anyone that would be willing to make, let's start with the staff recommendation. Is there anyone, I'm sorry, the monitoring committee recommendation, which has been a lot of the focus of the discussion. Is there anyone, council board member that would be willing to make that motion or wants to make that motion? Okay, seeing nobody making that motion, is there another motion that somebody would prefer to make? Michelle Duval?
I'm not going to make the motion. So as I stated earlier, I support the hatch level recommendation. I just think that that came from the monitoring committee that essentially would implement the staff recommendation for specs for the next 2 years. But I think the numbers need to be put in the appropriate places so that we have the ABC recommendation that comes from the SSC. We have I'm looking for the table from the monitoring committee. Here we are. So that you would have your commercial and recreational ACLs that are, I think, lower, where the 12%, where what's called a 12% buffer for management uncertainty is actually applied at the level of the ACL instead of the ACT. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that we are clear that there's some agreement around the table that the council and board, hopefully, are exercising their prerogative to set an ACL that is lower than the ABC. Does that make sense?
The question is, the numbers that are just, they were just in front of us a second ago. I'm going to go to Hannah. I understand what you're saying, Michelle. I thought that the monitoring committee recommendation was included all of that, but could be wrong. There's a lot of numbers here. It's a lot of changing assumptions. So let me go to Hannah to see if we can get this clarified.
Yeah, so Michelle, I'm wondering if you're recommending just the original staff recommendation, because I think we would have to set the ABC lower, because in order to get the ACLs, we have to use the allocations defined in the FMP. So 55% would go to the commercial and 45% would go to recreational. So are you saying that we would set the ABC lower, right, which is within the council purview, as Mr. Mike Pentney said, and then we would split that based on the FMP, the allocations, and then the ACLs would equal the ACTs, and then we would subtract discards to get the commercial quota and RHL? Because I understand what you're saying, but I don't know how we get there with the ACL split. Because it's not a 50-50 split.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying based on the allocations in the FMP, and but it is not, I just want to clarify that it's not within the council's purview to set a different ABC. The setting of the ABC is the SSC's responsibility, because the ABC accounts for scientific uncertainty. And so what I'm seeing in the national standard guidelines is that we can step down from the ABC and set an ACL that is lower.
Mike Pentney?
Thanks. The council cannot recommend an ABC higher than the SSC's recommended ABC. It has the discretion to set an ABC lower than the SSC's recommendation. The SSC is the ceiling for the ABC. So I think what we're trying to get to, and I'm happy to make this motion if it would get us moving in the right direction, is to make a motion for the original staff recommendation, which gets us an ABC, ACLs equal to the ABC, no management uncertainty buffer to the ACT, projected dead discards, and then the commercial quota and RHL, which would be consistent with the end result of the monitoring committee recommendation as well.
If you are willing to make that motion, Mike, I would ask
Okay.
if you want to do
So
that.
moved.
We'll get the motion up. I'm sorry, it'll take a little more than that. You'll have to read that into the record.
All right, so I move to adopt a constant ABC of 26.29 million pounds. For 2026 and 2027, the recreational ACL equals ACT equals 11.88 million pounds, and the RHL equals 8.79 million pounds. Commercial ACL equals ACT equals 14.52 million pounds, and the commercial quota equals 12.77 million pounds, with no changes to commercial measures.
Okay, thank you, Mike, for that motion. I'm assuming you'll make that on behalf of the board as well. Are you sitting as the
Yeah,
board?
happy to do so for both.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion, Mike Pentney from the council board. We're going to get a second from Rich Wong from the council. Do I have a board member who would like to second that motion? John Maniscalco's hand. John, can I confirm that you're seconding that motion?
Yes, I'd like to second the motion for the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mike, do you want to offer any additional rationale to what's already been stated?
I think it's already been stated, but just to clarify for everybody for the record. So the monitoring committee, wanted, as I understand it, and certainly Hannah can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the monitoring committee wanted to endorse the staff recommendation in terms of the end result, but was unable to do so because of the way the regs are written. They could not recommend an ABC lower than the SSC's recommendation. So they created this management uncertainty to create a buffer between the ACL and the ACT to get the same quotas that the staff recommended. So rather than try to, create a rationale around that process for management uncertainty buffers, if we just go with the staff recommendation that was put forward to the monitoring committee, it's within the council's purview to set an ABC lower than the SSC. And then not making any further adjustments for management uncertainty and getting the exact same result that the monitoring committee recommended.
Okay, thank you. And that was John Maniscalco that made the motion on behalf of the board, or seconded the motion. I'm going to go to Rich. Do you have any rationale, Rich?
Yes, I think we've been floundering on this issue because the MC and the staff are trying to accomplish the same thing. I mean, and I'm keep coming back and forth, and it's like, okay, the end result is pretty much the same. And I kept thinking, well, what does the center really prefer? And so that's what, yeah. And given how we voted also for Bluefish yesterday, how we moved with Bluefish yesterday, this is pretty consistent with that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. And lastly, we'll take John Maniscalco if you have any additional rationale to add.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's largely been said, and I appreciate Michelle and Mike's help getting us to this point. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion in front of us. Are there any further discussion on the motion? Joe Cimino?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mike. I chickened out asking this question before because I'm at a loss, and I hope the discussion would have helped me, but it hasn't. I thought this was a well-behaved model. I would see these buffers built in, and assuming that the catch was the problem, that the swings are very high. Otherwise, we have other data issues, recruitment or something like that. But I'm trying to understand, and maybe somebody could help me here. We're not seeing large overages in the catch limits. So then, to me, that's saying we're setting inappropriate catch limits, and they're being suggested as inappropriate. And so I'm curious, I didn't hear that in the SSC's discussion that we've been, that the model's been putting out inappropriate catch limits. And so I'm really confused on how we think that building buffers in on the catch is what's going to stop the swing. So I don't know if anybody could jump in and answer that. I'd kind of like to hear from Paul, who it really sounded like this was, a model that's well performing. So I'm uncertain as to how we're so concerned with the suggested catch limits.
I'll ask Paul if there's
Yeah.
anything he may want to add to that to help
Sure.
you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. I think the one partial answer to this is that because of their rapid growth and recruitment to the fisheries, they are kind of critically dependent on the most recent year classes. So they have a very strong and immediate influence on the magnitude of catches. If those catches, or if those estimates of recruitment are in fact under or overestimated, then it can have some influence on the magnitude of the projected catch. As Hannah illustrated, there was a year in which the quota was, or the estimated recruitment was thought to be very high, but in fact subsequent information revealed that it was lower. So you have a dependency in the quotas that is highly dependent on the most recent information, and in general terms, that information is the most uncertain because you don't have any additional information to validate or verify the accuracy of that estimate there. So they will swing, and they can produce those plus and minus swings as characterized by the monitoring committee.
Thank you. Adam Nowalski, and then Jeff will come to you. Adam.
Thank you. Given the discussion yesterday and today, I understand that the council is the same body that's here for both discussions. The commission, however, was a different body that was here discussing this. A lot of the same people, but it was the Bluefish Board. Today it's the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Board. But these two discussions about us starting to normalize precautionary management through management uncertainty buffers or something else does lead me to believe that there needs to be some discussion between the council and the commission moving forward about how to actually get that down on paper as what type of policy or procedure, or how we're going to do that moving forward. Obviously, that's a much larger topic than we're going to tackle today. On summer flounder specifically, I see 3 pathways forward today. Pathway 1 is the motion that's on the board that results in the RHL and commercial quotas that are on the board, but gets there by using the lower recommended by staff ABC and ACLs. Option 2 is to use the monitoring committee approach, which gets to the same RHL and commercial quota, but does so with higher ABCs, higher ACLs, and introducing management uncertainty. And option 3 is to go back to what came out of the SSC using those ABCs, ACLs, and then not including management uncertainty, which would result in higher quotas and RHLs. My specific question for the makers of this motion right now is, what is the benefit? And the question to staff would be, what are the potential down the road pitfalls of choosing the pathway of lower ABCs and ACLs as chosen by these bodies today versus having higher ABCs and ACLs on the books using management uncertainty as the deduction? They're both the same pathway. They result in the same RHLs, commercial quotas. Fishing community will wind up with the same outcomes, but I am wondering about the impacts that we may not be fully considering about setting lower ABCs and ACLs today. So what's the justification for that pathway versus using management uncertainty, which, in my opinion, matches what was done yesterday? We could have gone the same route yesterday and recommended lower ABCs and ACLs yesterday, but we didn't. We chose to use management uncertainty there. So I see this as inconsistent at the council level, recognizing that it's a different body here today with the commission, but it's a different process than what we chose yesterday.
Thanks for the question, Adam. I'll turn to Mike for an answer.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I mean, good question, perfectly reasonable question, and I think you hit it exactly right. I think that the fundamental difference between the two, well, I guess there's two differences between the two approaches of either the motion on the board or a motion consistent with the monitoring committee recommendation. Under this motion, the ACLs are lower, ABC is lower. So it increases the likelihood that an overage could trigger accountability measures, right? Because those get triggered. The circumstances that trigger an accountability measure, refer to exceeding the ACL or the total ABC. So that's a downside to this approach. I think the other difference, which may be a positive to this approach versus the monitoring committee recommendation, is it avoids, what seems to be some confusion or consternation, maybe is a better word, around applying management uncertainty equally to both the commercial and the recreational fisheries, given that those two fisheries are managed differently, with different levels of data certainty and reliability. And so having heard some, concern about the monitoring committee's approach to set an uncertainty buffer for both sectors, I thought at least to get the conversation rolling, we could start with the staff recommendation, which is what the monitoring committee was trying to get to, and see how people felt about that approach.
Okay, thank you for that. And Jeff Kalen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make a motion to substitute. I'm going to ask Hannah to put up the motion with the SSC's, ABC's on a constant approach. And I'll speak to the motion if I get a second. It's a motion for the board, of course.
Okay, why don't you read the motion that's up on the board, just to get it on the record, and then I'll ask for a second
Yeah,
to get started.
I'll do that. I'll move to adopt the following specifications for summer flounder based on the constant ABC approach. This is from the SSC. For 2026 and 2027, the recreational ACL equals ACT equals 13.5 million pounds, and the RHL equals 9.99 million pounds. The commercial ACL equals ACT equals 16.5 million pounds, and commercial quota equals 14.52 million pounds, with no changes to commercial measures.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So I have a motion on behalf of the board made by Jeff Kalen. Do I have a second on behalf of the board? Joe Grist will second on behalf of the board. Joe, do you want to make that as a member of the council? Okay, so we have the motion made by the council. Is there anyone who would like to second that on behalf of the council? Joe Semino. Okay, we have a motion to substitute, I believe you said, Jeff. It's a motion to a substitute.
Motion substitute.
That's right. Okay, let's discuss the motion. Would you like to provide some additional rationale, Jeff?
Yeah, my rationale would be contained in Paul's slides. Rationale for the CV is 60%, and the slide on sources of uncertainty. I could also read from pages 11 and 12 in the SSC's report. I won't do that, but essentially, as far as recruitment goes, the SSC is recognizing a new state of nature and using the last 14 years as a viable way to estimate recruitment. And it looks like there's good recruitment in the last couple of years. Also, the discussion about the models providing consistent results, for example, and so forth. I won't read this. I would like to, but I think we all have a lot to do today. But essentially, I think the SSC's justification for this motion were very clear. And you know what, listening to the monitoring committee discussion the other day, there was a lot of feelings. There was a lot of, unfairness and so forth relative to the potential outcomes here, rather on the commercial side versus the rec side, based on the box that the recreational industry finds itself in under the percent change approach with the relatively arbitrary 0.9% BMSY being low. So I'm going to reject all that and support this. I think we should be supporting this. When the fish are available, the fishermen need access to the stock that's available. If you take a look at the chart that goes up and down and up and down and up and down, and in the 13 years I've been involved here, we've certainly lived through that. But the SSC's perspective is that over time, there's a consistency here that needs to be recognized. And to me, that really discounts all of the feelings and concerns and so forth that are reflected in the monitoring committee recommendations. So that's my rationale, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jeff. I'm going to ask Joe Grist for any additional rationale, and then Joe Semino, I'll come to you in a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I've been sitting here very quiet today. A lot of my council members know that I've been struggling with this issue. But listening to all the debate around this table today and what we heard yesterday, summer flounder is a fishery commercially that is probably one of our best managed. The staffs that manage the quotas between, I know, the states of North Carolina and Virginia specifically, we work very much hand in hand, as we do as with other states like New Jersey. We almost know to the pound what's coming in, when it's coming in, and when to shut down. It's rare you ever see a problem in that fishery from management. I'm having a hard time assigning additional uncertainty to that when this is a well-run fishery. They have taken it on the chin these last couple of years. They've lost market. And even though we're talking about increasing the quota substantially, I'm not convinced there's certainty that have the market back to actually catch it. The fleet's hurting, and we're losing a lot of the fleet in our waters. So I support this for different reasons, not because of the monitoring committee comments. I'll leave those aside. But I'm supporting this because I think the industry can handle it. I think they need this work. The science is behind it. The SSC has supported it. And I'm going to lean to the SSC, which, having served on the SSC, that's their role.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Joe Semino, last word on the motion, and then I'll come back to the table.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think somewhere in between what Jeff and Joe have already said is, my question was, are the ups and downs catch driven? And I think, my answer or what I heard from Paul was this is a species that is heavily influenced by recruitment. And so, we're talking about a model that we believe in that has appropriate catch levels. And so to me, the question is, in those years where there is going to be recruitment coming in, are we going to set lower catch levels, thinking that we're making, the decisions on the ups and downs, and, potentially turning that year's availability and abundance into dead discards? Or are we going to allow the catch in those years? The long-term trends matter. That's what Jeff said, and that's obviously what we're managing to. And as Jeff said, that was a discussion that came out through the SSC. So we will always have to adjust to the long-term trends, but we're going to be riding the wave the entire time. And I think that the best way to do that is to ensure that we're allowing catch and not discards. And so that's why I support the substitute.
All right, thanks, Joe. So we have two motions before us. I'm going to go out to the public. I'm not going to take a ton of comments from the public, but is there anyone in the audience here that would like to make any comment regarding the motions? Okay, so I have one hand in the room, maybe three now. Is there anyone online from the public or any of the council members that are sitting today? And we'll get back to the board here and the council. Okay, let's do this. I'm going to take two comments from the audience, and I'll take two comments from the folks online. So I'm going to ask, is there anyone who wants to speak in favor of this motion in the audience? Greg?
Greg DiDomenico, Lunds Fisheries. I'll be as brief as possible, even though this is a complex topic. I support the substitute motion for one specific reason as it pertains to the SSC deliberation, lengthy deliberation on this topic. And what I would say is that if you think about the way the SSC arrived at their recommendation, it wasn't based upon just their discussions that day. It's also based upon the process that they have laid out ever since the last reauthorization of Magnuson. This has been going on for a very long time, including the process, the robust process that they have developed for scientific uncertainty. It's a 9-step process. This fishery has a CV of 60%, which is the best that you can possibly do, which is the difference between the OFL and the ABC. So having been to every SSC meeting and every MC meeting almost for the last 20 years, I've come to rely upon the SSC recommendation as what I support. Low and high. I'm not always happy with it, but low and high. We've supported it. Now, the other part to this is that the idea that we require or are looking for stability, that's in the eye of the beholder. The stability that we're looking for is the opposite of the discussion that happened at the MC and is happening today. I've followed this for the last 20 years, and the last MC completely diverted from what's happened over the last 19 years. So I rely upon each body to know exactly what their purview is and what's under their authority. And that was not adhered to during the MC, period. That's the instability that's a problem. We make investments in these fisheries that everybody knows about, MSC certification. It's not cheap, but it's worth it. And we rely upon that to make investments and explain to the people who work at Lunds and invest at Lunds and fish at Lunds that we're going to create some value. Now that we're going to create some value, This is the perfect opportunity for us to go to the SSC recommendation. I don't anticipate lower prices. I anticipate higher prices because we have invested in quality and sustainable fisheries, and the boxes are already printed, and the customers want fluke. That's what we're relying upon, taking advantage of the situation when it occurs, and that is now. Then I would also say, just from a kind of historical nuance perspective, when this occurred during the higher MRIP numbers, there wasn't the same deliberation about the 60% increase we got at that point. So I need consistency. That motion does it. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg, for your comments. Would anyone in the audience like to speak against the motion to substitute Mike Wayne? And I should have said it earlier. If you can keep your comments to just a couple minutes, it would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. Mike Wayne with American Sport Fishing Association. Look, I see this both ways. And for me, we on the recreational side have been really focused on stability. The national standard talks about stability, and this just the underlying motion resonates more with me in terms of stability across the entire fishery. I just think it's a better way to go. Thanks.
I appreciate those thoughts, Mike. Seeing no other hands online, I'm going to come back to the board and the council. There's a couple hands going up. Just going to go around the table. You got one shot. I'm going to start at Mike. We'll work our way around, and when we get back to me, we're going to vote. All right, Mike Penny.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I guess I'm still on board with, the main motion, which provides an increase to the commercial fishery, provides a little bit of relief for the recreational fishery, although we have to see what the measures would be under the harvest control rule. But I think the biggest concern is that, we've been here before. We went back and I looked at the data, and going back to 2002, 2003, when I started working on summer flounder, in 2005, the quota got up to just under 30 million pounds. That was followed immediately by 3 straight years of substantial reductions totaling 57% of the quota. Then in 2011, we finally got up over 25 million pounds again, just short of 26 million pounds. That was followed immediately by 3 straight years of reductions totaling 30% of the quota. Then we got up over 25 million pounds in 2022, 2023, which was followed by a 42% cut in the quota. So I think, what I take from that is when we have the opportunity to increase the quota for fluke, we need to be a little cautious. We need to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for having one good year followed by 2 or 3 significant cuts. And in terms, Joe Grist mentioned, the trying to establish markets. I think one of the ways we don't reestablish and maintain markets is when we have these huge swings in quota, and there's a high availability one year followed by no availability or very little availability for several years following that. So, I understand and appreciate the desire, particularly on the commercial side, to get the fish that are available. But I just think we can provide an opportunity for increased catch next year, and hopefully follow that with maybe some more increases the following years, rather than have to make some hard decisions a year from now or 2 years from now about a 30 or a 40% cut. The SSC has one job, and that's to provide us science advice based on the science. But it's the job of the council and the board to look at other factors and make a decision about, how to set the ACLs and the quotas that take into account those other factors as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Chris Bat-Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, in the past, I have supported motions like this, but for the reasons Mike Pentney gave, with the wide swings we've seen in the past when the catch levels get to a certain amount like this, I cannot support this motion. I've seen this too many times before over the last 20 years, either on, on the council and board or as a monitoring committee member. I think the other point that we brushed on a little bit, but just remind ourselves, because it came up a lot yesterday, is we do have an MRIP recalibration that'll feed into the next stock assessment. And that will affect just the overall catch, which will come out of the next assessment. So I think going too high, knowing the past history of how this has gone, we should really consider a lower catch as highlighted in the main motion. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Robert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess a question for staff that would kind of help me. I'm really on the fence with this. Part of me wants it, part of me doesn't. The positive year of recruitment we've had in 2002 or 22 and 23 is the main driver in the increase. In lieu of adding it now, how long until those fish will actually age out of the fishery or disappear? So what is our window of opportunity to be able to prosecute or capitalize on that surplus production? If knowing that fluke is not necessarily a short-lived species, if you've got possibly a 5 or 8 year window when these fish enter the fishery to be able to prosecute, to be able to capitalize on it, that's fine. I would err on the side of caution and to make sure that we see them again as years 3 and 4 before we actually ramp up. But I don't know if it's been looked at that way, but I don't think we necessarily need to, just because we saw it right now, let's pull the trigger on it. But on the flip side, more fish is more money. So once again, I'm arguing with myself.
And I don't have a solid answer for you, but I would assume that given the longevity of the species, that there would be a multi-year window of opportunity. At least a decade is Chris. Okay, who else around the table this way? Rich Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I'm trying to understand are the practical implications for this motion here. We're looking at a 6 million pound increase in the commercial quota from 25 to 26, which is, I'm always in favor of, benefiting the fisheries. But in the recent past, we've seen very large increases like this occur, for example, with black sea bass, and the market price weakened. And what we saw with our fishermen is that they had to fish harder to make the same amount of money. I would like to hear from the industry about that. I know Greg mentioned that they could utilize it, but what are the practical implications here for such a large jump in the commercial quota? And lastly, this is in this specific case, we're kind of hamstrung also with the percent change approach, because we're looking at a very large increase with regardless of any of the 3 options that we're looking at here, large increase in the commercial quota, but in practical terms, we're going to stay status quo with the recreational industry. So that's another kind of fairness thing here that I'm trying to grapple with. So I think even with the original motion, the commercial quota is really going to increase quite a bit. So I would stick with the initial motion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Crossing over to the other side of the table, I'll start with Eric Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support the substitute motion. As far as the market goes, there's a lot of things that drives the market for flatfish fillets, mostly fillets. They come from a lot of places that are not from the United States. And at this point, we have a unique economic situation. I'm not going to say it's good or bad, but in this case, it may be good, where seafood imports or substitutes for flatfish, we're going to have a tariff on those, which means the cost of goods coming from outside of this country is going to go up, which opens the door for domestic product. There's a lot of flatfish that come out of Brazil. There's a fish that looks almost identical to our fish in Brazil, and those fish come here, but with a higher tariff, it opens the door for American product. So I see an economic opportunity here, regardless of how much quota we get, and we should get it all we can get. The notion of stability really drives me a little bit crazier than I am, I suppose. The notion of stability is, well, we can get X amount of pounds, but let's not take too many just to be precautionary. Now, in theory, the other side of that seesaw is, well, when it goes down, when we need to go down, well, we don't have to go down that much until the SSC drops their advice, and then we have to go down, and we may have to go down a lot. It's the nature of this fish, and it's the nature of the fishery. I'm having a very hard time understanding stability because it's only a one-way thing. We can have this much, but let's be stable and not take so much. But when it goes the other way, we have no choice but to drop it to whatever comes out of the SSC or less. So I think it's a mistake not to take advantage of the economics of this fishery at the moment. And I just think that, once again, we're being precautionary, but I think we're doing it for the wrong reasons. And there's no backside to that. And whether the fishery itself and the biomass goes up or down, when we get this dreaded MRIP recalibration, it's probably going to go down anyway. For what reason? Is because we can't do math. So to me, I just, that's enough out of me. I support the substitute. Thank you.
Okay. And just to help you feel a little better, Eric, I think we're all a little crazy for just being in this room. So you're not alone. I'm looking up the side of the table, seeing no hands. Therefore, we are going to, I'm going to call the question on this motion. Does the board need an opportunity to caucus? Yeah, let's take 1.5, 2 minutes to caucus. If I can ask everyone to get back to your seats, please. Nicola and I flipped a coin, and the council is going to vote first on this matter. Both Nicola and I also wanted to make the comment on the record that we will be voting for our respective states as board members for those states. So we've been talking with our other board members, and we'll be the ones raising our hands for the votes. So okay, so there's a motion to substitute before us. I'm not going to read it back into the record. It was read clearly the first time with no changes. And I'm going to ask the council for all those in favor of the motion to substitute, please raise your hand. That's 5 in favor. All those opposed? Nine opposed. Any abstentions? One abstention. Motion fails the council for a lack of majority, 5 to 9 to 1. Based on the rules that we that have when we're meeting jointly, this motion to substitute now fails, and I will look back to staff to put back up on the board the original motion. Adam?
Thank you very much. So based on the discussion we had earlier and the 3 options, we've debated 2 of them. I'm going to make the motion for the 3rd pathway forward here, which would be to move to substitute. I'll just briefly say that I'll read the whole thing. I'm going to move to substitute the monitoring committee recommendation, which is the lower RHL, lower commercial quota, but the higher ABC and ACL. So I make this motion on behalf of the board, move to substitute to adopt the following specifications for summer flounder based on the constant ABC approach. For 2026 and 2027, the recreational ACL of 13.50 million pounds with a 12% management uncertainty buffer resulting in a recreational ACT of 11.88 million pounds and an RHL of 8.79 million pounds. The commercial ACL would be 16.50 million pounds with a 12% management uncertainty buffer, resulting in a commercial ACT of 14.52 million pounds and a commercial quota of 12.78 million pounds. With no changes to the commercial measures. If I get a second and the council has a like motion, I'll just add a little bit more to that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Adam. So Adam read the motion into the record and provided brief rationale as to the approach that he's recommending. He's made the motion on behalf of the board. Do I have a second on behalf of the board? Chris Bat-Savage will second that on behalf of the board. Turning to the council, Chris, would you like to make that motion on behalf of the council? Is there a second? Joe Semino. Okay, so we have a new motion to substitute. I am going to limit debate on this. So I'm going to ask for Adam's justification or rationale. We'll take a comment or 2, and then we're going to call the question on this one as well. Adam?
So I greatly appreciate the comments that were offered to my earlier question about debating between the ABC and the ACL. The answer about the risk to the accountability measure, really think this puts us in a better way to go while still addressing the concerns around the table about the lower commercial quota for stability. With regards to the issue of differing management uncertainties, again, let's keep in mind that the percent change approach that we'll be utilizing later in the year is likely going to significantly impact the recreational's ability to take liberalizations. So that, in my opinion, addresses the uncertainty concern and would allow for the similar number to be applied here that's up on the board, because there is additional uncertainty that will be addressed through the percent change approach on the recreational side. So I'm comfortable with the same management uncertainty being applied here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Adam. I'll go to the maker well, Chris was both aboard. We'll go to Chris and we'll get rationale from Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really have nothing else to add. The point that kind of drove home for me was just an extra buffer for the fisheries to avoid hitting accountability measures. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion? Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, either motion will get us to, I think, a more appropriate catch levels, for both sectors. I think for me, my struggle is really, it's more of a philosophical one about how we evaluate management uncertainty and what we consider to be management uncertainty. And, in going back and looking at the allocation amendment and how we've sort of set up our annual catch limit, annual catch target, and accountability measure framework, I understand that, we get the ABC and then we immediately divide it into, recreational and commercial annual catch limits. Honestly, from my perspective, I think a better approach would be we get an ABC from the, from the SSC, we have, and then the council, sets like a stock ACL, which is then set into commercial and recreational ACTs, which would allow us to consider some of these other factors with respect to stability and other things that are considered within the optimum yield framework. Either way, I think either this motion or the main motion, gets us to a place that I feel is more, appropriate given those factors, particularly stability. I was going to ask Mike Penny if he could just briefly reiterate what he felt the advantage was again in terms of the AMs, like what you said earlier. Thanks.
Mike.
Yep, thanks. So the accountability measures in the plans are based largely on whether the total catch exceeds the ACL and or the ABC. And so setting a buffer between the quota and the ACL ABC reduces the likelihood that we would trigger accountability measures. Having the ACL closer to and the ABC, having a lower ABC, which then is lower ACLs, increases the likelihood, should there be an overage, that AMs would be triggered.
Okay, so we're in a unique spot. So we have two motions that have kind of the same end result, but just different ways of getting there. That's as simple as I think I can put it with the complexity that's behind it. So does anyone need an opportunity to caucus? There are no more hands online or in the room. Is everyone okay if we call the question? Okay. All right, so I'm going to turn things over to the board first this time and ask for Nicola to call the question.
Okay, turning to the board, Tony, could you help with the reading out of states as they vote? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand, either in the room or online.
Rhode Island, New Jersey, Maryland, Massachusetts, no fisheries, North Carolina, Potomac River Fisheries Commission, Connecticut, Delaware.
Just waiting for one hand to go down online. Thank you. Those opposed, please raise your hand.
Virginia, New York.
Any abstentions?
Nope.
And any null votes?
No.
Motion carries 9-2.
Okay, thank you. And to the council, all those in favor of the motion to substitute, please raise your hand. Keep your hands up. Somebody changed one. That's 11 in favor. All those opposed? 4 opposed. Any abstentions? Seeing none, this motion carries. The council and the board therefore becoming the main motion. Now that this substitute motion is the main motion, I'm going to ask the council for all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. I got 12 that time. All those opposed? 3. So the motion carries the council. I'll turn it over to the board.
Is there any objection from the board to the motion? And there is, we'll do a roll call. So those in favor, please raise your hand.
Rhode Island, New Jersey, Maryland, Massachusetts, no fisheries, North Carolina, Connecticut, Potomac River Fisheries Commission, New York, Delaware.
Opposition to the motion?
Virginia,
Any abstentions?
nope.
No votes?
Nope.
The motion carries 10-1.
Okay. Thank you for that. Hannah, is there anything else that needs to come before the board or the council at this time on
Nope.
summer flounder?
Nope, that's
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Okay, let's take a 10-minute break and come back. Let's come back at 11:25. And we'll pick up SCUP. Okay, everybody. You have about a minute to get back to your seats, please. This is your 1-minute warning. Okay, everybody, I'd like to get the next item on our agenda started. I'd be interested to do a like an experiment on just people's internal clocks. Because whenever I say we have a minute or two, it's always the same few people that come back right away, and the rest just kind of linger in the back. It's always the same. It's never any different. Okay. So the next item on today's agenda, which will be what we'll do before lunch, we're going to take up similar question that we just did with summer flounder. We're going to be looking at setting 2026 and 2027 SCUP specifications. Hayden is with us from council staff and Chelsea from the commission staff. They're going to provide us with that presentation along with Dr. Rago. So Hayden, whenever you're ready to rock and roll.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Without further ado, let's talk about SCUP. We're going to follow a similar flow of information like we did for summer flounder. We'll review stock status, recent fishery performance, AP input, and recommendations from the SSC and monitoring committee. And just like we did for summer flounder, Dr. Paul Rago will jump in for the SSC overview. And as a reminder, the objectives for the council and board today are to adopt commercial and recreational catch and landing limits for SCUP for 2026 and 2027, and to recommend changes to commercial management measures if warranted. So the most recent stock assessment for SCUP was completed in June of this year. This assessment included data through 2024 and stock projections through 2027. According to this assessment, the SCUP stock was not overfished and overfishing was not occurring in 2024. Spawning stock biomass was found to be more than triple the biomass target, and fishing mortality was about 55% of the threshold. So diving a little further into the assessment, this figure just shows spawning stock biomass and recruitment over time. As with the 2023 management track assessment, the 2025 assessment required an adjustment for a retrospective pattern. And for SCUP, the model was underestimating biomass. So you can see on this graph here, that little red triangle in the upper right-hand corner of the chart represents that adjusted spawning stock biomass estimate, which again was found to be about 3 times the target. As for recruitment, since 2019, recruitment has been at or below the long-term average of 153 million age 0 fish and is not expected to increase in the near future, given this spawning stock biomass is projected to continue down this declining trend through 2027. This figure shows total catch and fishing mortality over time. Similar to spawning stock biomass, there was a retrospective pattern for fishing mortality, except that the assessment has been overestimating fishing mortality. So as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of this chart, that little red square represents the adjusted fishing mortality value. And as mentioned earlier, it's about 55% of the threshold. So this table shows total catch inclusive of commercial and recreational landings and dead discards compared to OFLs and ABCs from 2015 to 2025. Limits and catch values are in millions of pounds, and old MRIP data is used through 2019. As you can see, there were OFL and ABC overages in several years, including 2017, 2021, 2022, and 2023. In 2024, total catch was estimated to be about 37.47 million pounds, and the OFL and ABC were not exceeded. This graph shows total catch from 1996 to 2024, broken out into commercial and recreational landings and dead discards, with the commercial sector shown in orange and recreational in blue. And I'll note that revised MRIP data is reflected throughout the entire time series. Over the last 2 decades, total catch has generally increased and has remained relatively constant in recent years, with a peak in 2017, which was likely attributed to the strong recruitment class we saw in 2015. One thing to note is recent fluctuations in commercial discards. Commercial discards peaked at about 10.43 million pounds in 2017, which is the highest since the early 1980s. And in 2024, approximately 10.34 million pounds of scup were discarded in commercial fisheries. So we're approaching that peak level of discards in this time series. So zooming into the commercial sector even more, this table shows recent trends in commercial landings and catch compared to commercial quota and annual catch limits. As you can see, commercial quota and ACL overages have been rare, with the exception of 2023, when higher than expected dead discards resulted in a slight ACL overage. I'll also note that 2023 was the first year that the new commercial and recreation allocation percentages took effect. So the commercial allocation decreased from 78% to 65%. And in 2024, the quota and ACL do increase notably. In 2024, about 14.5 million pounds of scup were landed in the commercial fishery, which amounts to about 69% of the commercial quota, and the ACL was not exceeded. So this chart is just showing commercial landings, price and value over time, and all values represented in this graph have been adjusted to the 2024 dollar to account for inflation. Over the past 2 decades, total scup ex vessel value, which is the orange line, ranged from a low of 5.7 million pounds in 2001 to a high of $14.6 million dollars in 2015. In 2024, total ex vessel value was about $10.17 million, with an average price per pound of 72 cents, which is that line in gray. The average price per pound has remained relatively similar since about 2010. In general, the price of scup tends to be lower when landings are higher and vice versa. So before we move on, I just want to provide a brief overview of the scup commercial quota periods, because this relates to some comments and recommendations that staff received from advisors and NIMFs that we'll review later on in the presentation. So the commercial scup quota is allocated across 3 quota periods: winter 1, summer, and winter 2. This table shows the dates each quota period is in effect, what percentage of the commercial scup quota is allocated to each period, and the starting possession limit for each period. And these possession limits may change as specified by certain measures in the fishery management plan. So for example, in the winter 1 period, there's a provision in place to prevent overages of the winter 1 quota period allocation. The possession limit starts at 50,000 pounds, and when 80% of the winter 1 quota has been caught, this possession limit drops to 1,000 pounds, and that limit stays in place until the end of the period or when the winter 1 quota is reached. Similarly, there's a measure in place to make use of leftover quota from winter 1 in the winter 2 quota period. The possession limit for winter 2 increases by 1,500 pounds for every 500,000 pounds that is not caught during the winter 1 quota period. And I'll note that this increased possession limit has occurred over the past several years. The figures on this slide are pulled directly from the GARFO quota monitoring website, and it shows the landings this year from the winter 1 period and what landings are looking like so far for the summer period compared to last year's landings. As a reminder, the winter 1 period runs from January 1st to April 30th. And this year's winter 1 landings trended below landings from last year. The current year's landings for winter 1 are that darker blue line, and last year's landings are yellow. And I know it's a bit hard to see on the screen there. This year's winter 1 landings appear to be below quota, reaching about 87%. And for the summer period, as a reminder, that runs from May 1st to September 30th. This year's landings are trending very similarly to last year's landings, and as well below that quota rationing trajectory. The quota rationing trajectory is that green line that just represents how the quota would be distributed to meet but not exceed the quota throughout the entire period. And as of August 6th, in the summer period, we're at about 38% of quota. And one more thing to review before we move on is just the SCUP gear restricted areas. The GRAs were first implemented in the year 2000 with the goal of reducing juvenile SCUP discards in small mesh trawls. Within these areas and during certain times of year, trawl vessels may not fish for or possess longfin squid, black sea bass, or silver hake unless a mesh of at least 5 inches in diameter is used. The effective dates for the Northern GRA are November 1st to December 31st, and those dates for the Southern GRA are January 1st to March 15th. And speaking of the GRAs, there's been effort in recent years to evaluate trends in commercial discards and to evaluate the effectiveness of the GRAs in reducing juvenile SCUP discards. In 2023, the council reviewed an analysis that suggested the GRAs have had an impact in reducing juvenile SCUP discards. And I do have a supplemental slide or two with some updated figures from that analysis that kind of illustrate what that impact of the GRAs has been. And after reviewing the analysis of the GRAs in 2023, the council and board recommended building upon the analysis to investigate potential modifications to the GRAs or alternative approaches. So council staff are currently working with a team from Cornell Cooperative Extension to complete this work. Overall, the goal of the SCUP GRA project is to map and model bycatch and discard hotspots for SCUP over time and evaluate the effectiveness or evaluate the trade-offs between different management strategies to reduce SCUP bycatch and impacts on fishermen. Last fall, the team gathered input from commercial fishery stakeholders on the effectiveness of the GRAs, socioeconomic impacts of the GRAs, and suggested GRA modifications. And a follow-up workshop will be held this fall where preliminary results from the project will be presented to stakeholders. And the final results of the project are tentatively going to be available in early 2026, so it's still under development. Moving on to the recreational fishery, this table shows recent trends in recreational landings and catch compared to RHLs and ACLs. With the exception of 2024, recreational landings have consistently exceeded the RHL and the ACL in recent years. And I'll note that the percent change approach was first implemented in 2023. Unlike the previous process, recreational measures no longer aim to achieve the RHL, but rather aim to achieve a different level of harvest. So under this new process for 2024 and 2025, the target is 13.76 million pounds. So in 2024, recreational landings were estimated to be about 11 million pounds, which is 20% less than the target of 13.76 million pounds and below the RHL and the ACL. So regarding advisory panel input, Hannah covered some general comments and feedback that applied to all 3 species. So here I'm going to focus on some SCUP specific comments. This year there was some discussion on stock availability and trends. One advisor commented that recreational landings in New Jersey and Southern New York are very low, and boats in Southern New York have not caught as many SCUP as usual. Another advisor elaborated on the situation in New York, comparing SCUP availability on the southern and northern shores of Long Island, and both advisors suggested that colder water is related to the observed change in SCUP availability. There was also discussion of issues facing the commercial fishery and market or economic dynamics. One advisor raised concern about the market competition between SCUP and tilapia, expressing frustration with management for allowing the market share to go to tilapia despite having SCUP as a viable alternative. And before the advisory panel meeting, council staff did receive a suggested regulatory change from NIMS regarding the winter one quota period language. So this was shared with the advisory panel, and multiple advisors weighed in on the suggested regulatory change and also offered other recommendations. So the words that you see in quotation marks here are the language is currently written in the regulations. So I'm going to go through what the suggested regulatory change from NIMS could look like. So the current regulations read, the winter one SCUP commercial possession limit will drop to 1,000 pounds when 80% of that period's allocation is landed. And the modifications you see here is not language that was formally recommended by NIMS. This is just what staff came up with to illustrate how the suggested change could be incorporated into the regulations as written. So now it says the winter one SCUP commercial possession limit will drop to 1,000 pounds when 80% of that period's allocation is projected to be landed rather than when landed, unless such a reduction would be expected to prevent attainment of the winter one quota. So the first part of the suggested change would allow NIMS to implement a reduced possession limit when 80% of the threshold is projected to be reached. And what this would do is allow GARFO staff to prepare notification of a possession limit reduction earlier using a landing projection, as opposed for waiting for the threshold to be reached. And this could be helpful because there could be a delay in publishing notifications. And if landings are going up more quickly than expected, the delay could result in a winter one quota overage. So it just adds some flexibility to how the provision is implemented. The second part of the suggested change would make the possession limit reduction discretionary. Under current regulations, the step down is automatically triggered when the threshold is reached with no consideration of whether an overage is likely. And I think a good way to kind of understand the potential benefit of this change is to use a hypothetical example. So let's say there are 100 days in the winter one quota period, and on day 95, that 80% threshold is reached. If there's 20% of the quota remaining and only 5 days to catch it, it may be unlikely that the rest of that quota would be caught. So by making the reduction discretionary, NIMS could say, well, it's unlikely that the quota will be met or exceeded, so there's no need to implement a possession limit reduction here. So after being presented with a proposed change from NIMS, several advisors asked questions and made comments about winter one regulations, and also offered some additional recommendations, which I'll get to in a moment. One advisor commented on the existing winter one trip limits regulations, stating that if implemented as written, fishermen would likely not go offshore for 1,000 pounds of SCUP. This advisor asked for clarification on the proposed change and if the existing provision has been used historically. The existing provision was used at least twice, once in 2009 and once in 2010. And I do have a supplemental slide with some background information on that if people are interested in reviewing that further. And this advisor also questioned whether quota left over from winter one is always caught at the end of winter two. This has not been dug into yet, so further research is required for that. Another advisor asked what would be required to remove the possession limit reduction altogether. A framework action would be required to make that change. Another advisor recommended removing this step down, noting that if the recreational sector can exceed their harvest limit and not be penalized, it is unfair that the commercial sector is held so strictly to their quota. And like I mentioned before, the AP provided additional input on modifications to these regulations, and we'll get to those in a few slides, so stay tuned. Turning to recreational fishery performance, one advisor expressed frustration with New Jersey's 2-month close season for SCUP in July and August. They noted the importance of having the opportunity to target SCUP in the summer, especially since New Jersey accounts for less landings than other northern states. And they stated that they disagree with SCUP management measures being tied to black sea bass. There's also some discussion of research recommendations. One advisor commented that they have consistently asked for a comparison of tilapia and SCUP market shares for markets in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. And the same advisor questioned whether it is possible to develop a cooking method that reduces the bones in SCUP to improve their marketability. And multiple advisors submitted additional comments over the phone or email. One advisor commented that there are lots of SCUP around and larger jumbo size classes have the best value, noting that the overall average price is around 40 to 50 cents per pound. One advisor suggested that NOAA or NIMS could task Sea Grant with developing a bone softening solution. And now we're returning back to these winter one trip limit regulations. So one advisor expressed support for any regulatory change to the winter one fishery that would not trigger the 1,000-pound trip limit upon reaching 80% of the quota, recommending that the council consider eliminating the 1,000-pound possession limit. They also noted that they feel any potential overages would be minimal and no winter two paybacks would be required. Overages could be assessed at the end of the year to determine if a payback was necessary. And another advisor offered 3 separate recommendations. This other advisor recommended that the 80% threshold for reducing the possession limit be raised to at least 95%. They recommended that if the threshold remains at 80%, the reduced possession limit of 1,000 pounds should be raised to 25,000 or 30,000 pounds. And they also recommended that GARFA's proposal to revise Winter 1 quota period language be combined with the above recommendations and increase commercial quota. This advisor also stated it is a problem that the commercial fishery cannot catch their full allocation and fewer restrictions are placed on the recreational fishery for catch limit overages. And just to know, all of these recommendations pertaining to the Winter 1 regulations will be summarized on a later slide. So we'll return to this again. And finally, as Hannah mentioned during the summer flounder presentation, an advisor asked staff to show F over FMSY in relation to OFL and ABC overages to help illustrate the consequences of OFL and ABC overages in terms of overfishing. And if we look at the time series of fishing mortality from the 2025 management track assessment for SCUP, it appears that OFL and ABC overages did not necessarily result in overfishing. And with that, I will hand the presentation over to Paul if he's ready to go through the SSC recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Hayden. Yeah, the stock is a long way from being overfished. It's currently estimated to be 300% of the BMSY level. The assessment continues to have this strong retrospective pattern, and that requires adjustment of the terminal year biomass upward and the fishing mortality rates downward. This is different than a lot of assessments where the opposite adjustments are true. The retrospective pattern is indicative of some underlying tension within the model. Some process, some temporal process is changing faster than the model is able to accommodate it. So candidate processes that may be changing could be natural mortality rate and or selectivity. We'll talk a little bit about the selectivity and kind of highlight that. One of the major concerns that the SSC expressed is sort of this mismatch between the age composition of the SCUP that are sampled in various surveys and the age composition sampled from the commercial harvest. There's a kind of a split with age 3 and older showing up in the commercial, age 3 and younger primarily represented in the surveys. So that kind of condition sort of creates some tension within the model in the ability to track the existence of larger fish in the surveys over time. So that results in a change in the selectivity pattern. In terms of next slide, please. In terms of the effect of the assigned OFL CV, it reduces the ABC by about, it reduces the OFL by about 2%. This is small, of course, and there's several factors related to that. The first is the current stock size is very high. So under the council risk policy, the risk of overfishing is set at 0.49. That means that there's only a 51% chance of overfishing under this. So it's fairly liberal with respect to stocks that are much lower. The OFL CV has relatively little influence on the reduction, and that's because it has little effect at very high stock levels. So next slide kind of gives a sort of a snapshot of the factors as we described for both bluefish and summer flounder. There are three sort of tier 1 factors: the data, the model, and the retrospective pattern. And then there's the secondary tier, which refers to empirical comparisons, ecosystem processes, and recruitment. There's a lot of details in the report itself, but in general, the model was given the data were given a score of 100% CV. That is basically related to this mismatch I mentioned previously, and one of the consequences within the model is that the age 6+ group, which is the so-called plus group within the assessment, is assumed to be lightly exploited. When that like when that selectivity is low, that means the stock size gets high. So that could be driving some of the model performance. One way in which this has been addressed, as I mentioned, there's some underlying tension, there's some factor that's changing faster than the model is accommodating. There were some recent changes with adding new selectivity blocks, which means that they allowed those to vary in the most recent years a little more. It improved the model diagnostics, but it really didn't solve the problem. So there's still something else remaining within the model. The empirical comparisons with other experiments and sort of this large disparity between the surveys and catches with respect to age composition resulted in kind of we set that CV for 150% for that quantity. There haven't been any explicit ecosystem factors incorporated, and there are no clear trends in recruitment. But however, we noticed that 2024 is the lowest in the time series, and then so the overall score ended up being 100 for these multiple factors. Again, this is not a simple average. It's based on the gestalt, if you will, sort of the weight of the evidence, so but it does go through multiple factors and sequentially in order to try to provide that what we think is an important structure for decision making. In terms of sources of uncertainty, next slide, please. The retrospective patterns have increased in this management track assessment compared to previous ones. And as I noted, they underestimate spawning stock biomass and overestimate F. So the relationship between this and the probability of overfishing is not completely understood. We noted that most of the survey indices do not include ages 3+, and recommend, in light of that the critical importance of maintaining adequate port sampling. That's where we get the information related to the magnitude of the larger and older fish. There may be some further need to address natural mortality, and particularly what constitutes an appropriate MSY proxy. That of course would involve a fairly detailed amount of work and wouldn't be something that would occur in a management track assessment. This species, along with many others, are the availability, the timing of the surveys, and the changes in the environment can result in confounding of various factors within survey indices, and that in turn results in sort of a reduced coherency, if you will, among them. So that can change over time. Also we noted that the assumption that we make when doing these projections is that the ABC will be caught and not exceeded, but the OFL, as Hayden described, has been exceeded in 3 of the last 4 years. So that assumption will probably need to be revisited, and there's an immediate influence of the effect of sort of the management uncertainty and its translation to the ABC recommendation. Next slide, please. In terms of the ecosystem effects, the updated assessment did not consider any additional ecosystem effects compared to prior management track and research track assessments. The efforts to estimate habitat suitability based on a thermal niche model did not improve the model fits. So we're unable to find a significant relationship between that niche and sort of stock dynamics. This is in contrast to some other species, such as butterfish, where that niche estimate has proven to be an important component. It's moderately vulnerable to climate effects, and there's sort of ought to be a high vulnerability with respect to changes in ocean climate. Next slide, please. Research recommendations sort of follow from the concerns that previously expressed. Characterized pattern of selectivity for older fish is important in both the surveys and the fisheries. We want to evaluate, and in particular, the impacts of potential reductions and realized reductions in port sampling. Those reductions have not been uniform across all species, so but in general terms, they are significant, in particular in this case where there is that reliance on large older fish found primarily in the commercial landings. There may be some advantages of using alternative statistical methods to integrate the survey data. The one that obviously comes to mind is the so-called VAST model, which looks at the autocorrelation over space and time to estimate sort of an integrated measure across multiple surveys. There's a lot of need to investigate declining weights at age and increasing maturity at age. Those, in fact, do govern the magnitude of subsequent catches. So, catching a lot of smaller fish at age can become important as those changes become greater over time. The estimates of discards and discard mortality in both commercial and recreational fisheries is important. And further work on estimation of catchability in the SCUP in the center survey would be helpful. Hard bottom experiments in earlier years, with traps, I think were helpful on a step in sort of this particular recommendation. And then finally, it's important to consider the magnitude of natural mortality and try to address whether or not perhaps some age specificity of those that natural mortality may be important in terms of driving the underlying dynamics. So again, it's this large retrospective pattern, despite its sort of positive influence on increasing the biomass estimates, it's indicative of an underlying tension within the model, and that needs to be, I think, further addressed. So that concludes my comments, and I'll turn it back to you, Hayden. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. All right, so after the SSC met, the monitoring committee met to discuss recommendations for catch and landing limits. And the flow chart you see here is how we get from the OFL to sector-specific catch and landings limits. For SCUP, the allocation is catch-based. 65% of the ABC is allocated to the commercial fishery as a commercial ACL, and 35% is allocated to the recreational fishery as a recreational ACL. From there, the monitoring committee can recommend a management uncertainty buffer, which would be subtracted from the ACL to calculate sector-specific annual catch targets, or ACTs. Then projected discards for each sector are estimated and subtracted from the sector-specific ACTs to calculate the commercial quota and recreational harvest limit, or RHL. So over the next several slides, I'll go over the monitoring committee discussion and recommendations for each of these steps. So the calculation of ACLs is more straightforward, like we just talked about. You just apply the FMP allocation to the ABCs. So shown here is what the ACLs would be under the SSC recommended varying ABC approach. For 2026, the commercial ACL would be 27.36 million pounds. and that decreases slightly to 24.06 million pounds in 2027. For the recreational side in 2026, the ACL starts at 14.73 million pounds and also decreases to 12.95 million pounds. And moving on to the sector ACTs, the monitoring committee recommended no deductions to account for management uncertainty, agreeing with the rationale laid out in the staff memo. And this slide just summarizes some of the considerations that are laid out in the memo. The reporting of commercial and recreational fishery effort, catch, and landings are inherently different, and for these reasons, it's more challenging to closely monitor and predict recreational landings compared to commercial landings. The different management approaches in place for the two sectors are intended to account for some of these key differences. For example, the commercial fishery can be closed in season when landings approach the quota, but in-season closures are not used for the recreational fishery. In addition, the percent change approach for the recreational side is designed to result in more stability in measures and requires greater consideration of statistical uncertainty in harvest estimates than the commercial approach. And it's also worth noting that under the most recent iteration of the percent change approach, the council and board may choose to implement more restrictive measures, and so a buffer between the recreational ACL and ACT is not the only opportunity to address recreational management uncertainty. The monitoring committee also discussed an approach to project commercial and recreational discards to be subtracted from the ACTs to derive the commercial quota in RHL. Ultimately, the monitoring committee agreed with the staff recommended approach highlighted in the memo, which looks at the most recent 3-year average proportion of sector-specific dead discards from the most recent management track assessment relative to sector-specific catch. And I'll note that this is the same discard projection methodology recommended for summer flounder. And the monitoring committee did note that for future decision-making, they would like to see a comparison of various discard projection methodologies, and I do have a comparison in supplemental slides if you would like to reference those. So the monitoring committee recommended method involves taking the 3-year average proportion of discards and applying that proportion to the ACT for each sector. The average proportion of recreational discards for 2022 to 2024 is 10.6%, and when applied to the ACT, that results in projected discards of 1.7 million pounds and 1.38 million pounds for 2026 and 2027. The average proportion of commercial discards for those same years is 35.3%, resulting in projected discards of 9.66 and 8.49 million pounds for 2026 and 2027. This method shifts a slightly higher proportion of catch to discards for the commercial sector and a slightly higher proportion of catch to landings for the recreational sector. And I do apologize for the discrepancy in the staff memo. I believe it's listed that it shifts catch to discards for both sides, when in reality it's what's listed on the slide. And this is what the monitoring committee did discuss. And you'll see those numbers on the following slide. So for the commercial sector, the shift to discards may be appropriate given a recent trend of underestimating commercial discards. And what you see here in this table is just the performance of discard projections over the last decade. The numbers in green shows where discards were overestimated, and red shows years where discards were underestimated. And all the numbers highlighted in yellow are just to indicate years where ACL overages occurred due to higher than expected dead discards. So as you can see here, underestimation of commercial discards hasn't always resulted in ACL overages since the commercial sector has been consistently below quota, but in recent years, the only ACL overages have been due to higher than expected dead discards. And compared to the commercial sector, the recreational discard estimates have been variable with some over and underestimation, and discards were overestimated in the most recent year. While ACL overages have been more common for the recreational side, the majority of overages in recent years are due to recreational harvest exceeding the ACL rather than the source just being higher than expected dead discards. As with the last slide, the numbers in yellow highlight a year where an ACL overage is due to higher than expected dead discards. And I'll note that that ACL overage was only by 1%, and the years that have an asterisk in front of it represent where ACL overages occurred when recreational landings exceeded the ACL. So this slide just breaks down the catch and landing limits from the OFL using the monitoring committee recommendations that The sector-specific ACLs would equal the ACTs, and then that approach we just went over for calculating discards to get to the resulting commercial quota and RHLs. So moving on to federal commercial measures, this slide outlines the measures that could be changed through specifications, and ultimately, given the lack of any new information, the monitoring committee recommended no changes for 2026 and 2027. That being said, there were several recommendations regarding the Winter 1 possession limit regulations. So I'm gonna summarize all the recommendations here and provide a little background so that you all can get a little more context for what modifications have occurred over the years and what future analysis could look like to consider any changes to these regulations. So as a reminder, the current regulations are listed at the top of the slide as currently written, and these are all the proposed modifications that were discussed with the advisory panel and the monitoring committee. So first recommendation is to allow GARFO to implement the step down when the quota is projected to be reached and make the provision discretionary, increase the 80% threshold, increase the 1,000-pound reduced possession limit, and remove the possession limit step down altogether. Now, when possession limits were adopted for the winter quota periods through a 1996 regulatory amendment to the Summer Flounder and Scup Fishery Management Plan, Council staff examined 1988 to 1992 weigh-out data to glean traditional landings patterns. Staff evaluated how many trips on average occurred at different landings thresholds. So, for example, greater or equal to 1,000 pounds, greater than or equal to 10,000 pounds or 30,000 pounds. And they use those patterns to determine appropriate possession limits for both the Winter 1 and Winter 2 quota periods. Since that time, few modifications have been made to these regulations, but a similar threshold analysis was replicated to inform a change to the Winter 1 trip limit in 2012 when the original possession limit of 30,000 pounds was increased to 50,000 pounds. And just to note other modifications, the reduced possession limit of 1,000 pounds remains at the original value, and the original threshold for implementing the possession limit reduction was 85%. And at some point before 2010, that was reduced to 80%. So the actual values for the percentage threshold and the possession limits themselves can be modified through specifications. However, building flexibility into provision or outright removing the provision would require the council to initiate a framework action. Given these regulations have not been reviewed in recent years and given feedback from NIMS and advisors, staff recommend adding a review of the Winter 1 possession limit and percentage threshold values as part of the 2026 implementation plan. And staff envisioned for this essentially replicating the threshold analyses used to inform setting the original possession limits and modifying the possession limit in 2012 and evaluating how changes to these values would interact with the changes proposed by NIMS. And as a reminder, the goal for today is just to adopt catch and landing limits for 2026 and 2027 and to consider if any changes are needed to the commercial measures shown on the screen here. And to close out, this is just a simplified summary of the final monitoring committee recommendations. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Hayden. And thank you, Paul, for the presentation. Let's see if there's anybody that has any questions. Adam?
My question is regarding the retrospective patterns touched on in the SSC report through the assessment. The report notes that the patterns are increasing, but also that the source of the retrospective pattern is unknown. So I'll ask for a little bit of hypothetical consideration here. Are we seeing these patterns scaling with the increase in stock size? Is it potentially a function of the model not being well trained on a stock that is this far above a target? Should we be expecting the magnitude of this retrospective bias to increase should stock size continue to increase, and factor that into our management considerations going forward? So those are just some hypothetical points to try to answer, but again, I think the overarching question is this retrospective pattern scaling with stock size, and any input on the other topics I mentioned would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I'll turn to Hayden or Paul.
Yeah, I'll let Paul take this one. I think he's the better source of information.
Okay, thank you, Hayden. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Adam. You raised a lot of good questions. I think the first one, with respect to scaling, we typically express the retrospective pattern with respect to a percent change. So when we say that it is increasing, that percentage change, or the required adjustment, is scaled with respect to percent changes, not with respect to absolute magnitude. So obviously, if the stock is higher and the percent change is increasing, then the absolute magnitude also increases. But when we're expressing that concern that it's increasing, we're expressing it with respect to the percent change of the retrospective. You're absolutely right that if the processes related to density dependence are sort of governing the magnitude and direction of the retrospective pattern, there may be some uncharted territory here. There's some evidence with respect to changes in and reductions in average weights at age and increases in age at maturity, that is, they're delaying maturity. These could be density dependent factors. These could be factors underlying the change. And again, one of the structural features with respect to the surveys and the commercial landings in particular that may be exacerbating, if you will, those conditions could be this sort of lack of trend information for the age 3+. So I'll stop at that, and if there's any other issues, we'll try to address them. And Sam Truesdale is on the line as well, so he might be able to add further to this. So thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Mike Penny.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Hayden, do you mind, can you go back a number of slides? You had a slide that was very interesting that showed the OFL overages, and then also a column that showed the performance of the realized F against the FMSY. And Paul, this is going to be a question for you. Yeah, thanks. So, you mentioned in your presentation that we've exceeded the OFL 3 out of the last 4 years, and I think that's demonstrated here on this slide in the first column. But given that we were specifying an OFL, sort of projecting a level of catch that would result in overfishing or likely to result in overfishing, the third column there showing our the performance of the F against FMSY suggests that specification of OFL might be misspecified given that performance. And I'm not sure if you can speak to that. At least that's the way I'm interpreting this slide. So I don't know if you can speak to that, because I'm struggling with the idea that SSB has gone up by 77%, and yet we're expecting a decrease in the OFL.
Yeah, it is a kind of a dilemma, and it doesn't comport with what you think. The realized estimate of F, you would think, should be higher, given that the OFL overage was greater than anticipated. So some of this may be embedded within the selectivity pattern and how those may change over time. They do get updated with each assessment. You may keep the same stanzas, but the force of age-specific mortality, that is, how much mortality is occurring on 2, 3, 4-year-old fish, can change as the assessments are updated. So it's not a 100% consistent measure of the overall force of mortality. I realize that's a very dissatisfying answer, but I don't think it points to the fact that the model is internally inconsistent. So I think that there's something else going on, and some of those factors may be those which are manifest as that retrospective pattern. And as noted in the model, F is being overestimated with the retrospective. So hopefully that doesn't muddy the waters too much, but I don't think it's possible to really isolate a clean, distinct response to your question. So, thank you.
Follow up, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I don't know if this is a follow-up, and this might just be something to consider, in the future. But if we continue to see this pattern of specifying an OFL that gets exceeded, but yet we've been well under the FMSY level, which is clearly the pattern that we're seeing here, at what point do we take a step back and reconsider how we're specifying OFL?
Yeah, you've read ahead with respect to the black sea bass situation coming up. So this is in fact one of the factors underlying the basis for the black sea bass recommendation. And I think various aspects of model performance, projections, and so forth will need to be addressed in more detail. And while I have the floor, that the SSC has been supportive of the projection methodology research track, which in fact would address or at least attempt to address some of these general issues. So thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you for that. Some good questions and some things to think about, I guess, for the future and the future work that we do. With that said, I don't see any other hands at this time, so I will entertain a motion if anyone is prepared to make a motion at this time to set 2026 and 2027 specs. Michelle Duval.
I don't know if staff has a draft motion prepared, just to make sure that I only have to say it once. All right, thank you. So I move to adopt the following specifications for SCUP for 2026 and 2027. For 2026, the recreational ACL equals ACT equals 14.73 million pounds with an RHL of 13.17 million pounds. The commercial ACL equals ACT equals 27.36 million pounds with a commercial quota of 17.7 million pounds. For 2027, the recreational ACL equals ACT equals 12.95 million pounds with an RHL of 11.58 million pounds. The commercial ACL equals ACT equals 24.06 million pounds with a commercial quota of 15.57 million pounds. No changes to the commercial measures, which can be modified through specifications.
Thank you for that, Michelle. I'll ask for a second on behalf of the council. Jim Gilmore. And off to the board. Jeff Kalin makes that motion on behalf of the board. Joe Grist will second. Michelle, would you like to provide any rationale that you have?
I think no additional rationale beyond, what staff has presented through the memo and what's been, discussed here today. I think it's well stated and I don't need to take up any more time.
Jim?
Nothing to add, thanks.
Jeff Kalin?
I feel the same way, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
And Joe?
Ditto.
Excellent. Okay. Let's discuss. Does anyone have any comment regarding the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no hands, Mike Penny, sorry.
Yeah, I have a question. I apologize. I should know this, but maybe ask John Hare. Is there any expectation that we would be getting a data update or anything on SCUP next year?
The 2026 schedule is still under discussion and will be the topic for the August 20th NRCC intersessional. So I don't want to speak before we've had a chance to talk about as a group. I will say that data updates are much easier to produce than assessments. And so I think I'll just make sure that we need to make sure that the assessment working group has that on their list of things to consider. So I'll reach out to Mike Simpkins, and I know Brandon was here, and so he can sort of take that to that group as well.
I mean, I guess the purpose of my question is to, whether we'll have an opportunity before the reduction that's proposed here for 2027 goes into effect. We'd have the opportunity to review any available data and see if that reduction is in fact still necessary before we implement it.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that comment, Mike. Is there anyone else on the board or the council? Is there any, I'm sorry, I'm going to go to the public in a second. We'll go to Adam first. Go ahead, Adam.
The SSC used some projections versus SSB performance from the assessment analysis in black sea bass. We'll hear about that this afternoon. It sounds like from Mike Petney's question and that slide we saw about OFL performance versus FMSY, a similar analysis would be warranted for SCUP. How would we go about, who would we task doing that so that the SSC could potentially look at that moving forward? If you want to put that discussion off until we vote on this, that's fine. But I think that's something I would like to see, given the impact we've seen it having on black sea bass. Seems like something similar would be warranted at this time for SCUP.
Well, I'm going to call on Chris and have him make what say what he said to me, because he'll get it right the first time.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So we are going to have those kinds of conversations at that August 20th meeting that John just referenced. So we'll add it to the list and see what we might be able to do with that. Obviously, there's a resource issue in terms of our ability to do a number of things, and we'll have to see how that fits into that particular puzzle. So again, we'll add it to the list for our August 20th meeting and see where it goes. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, seeing no more hands, are there any comments from the public? Mike Queen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Wayne with American Sport Fishing Association. Sorry, just couldn't let this one go. That discussion is something that I brought up over the last several years on black sea bass, the mismatch between realized fishing mortality and our projected OFLs. I would hate to see resource constraints be thrown in the way of the SSC actually taking that very seriously. I think it's having an impact on how we're managing these fish and the ability for us to access these resources that are clearly very healthy. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Anyone else from the public? Okay, seeing no additional hands, we'll bring this back to the table. Any further discussion before we call the question? Does anyone need time to caucus with their other commissioners in their states? Seeing no need, I'm going to go ahead and call this question for the council. We'll try to do it the quick way. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing no objection, the motion carries the council by unanimous consent. Nicola?
Moving to the board, is there any objection to the motion from the board? Seeing no hands, the motion carries by unanimous consent.
Hayden, is there anything else that needs to come before council or the board at this time?
Unless there was any further input on the staff recommendation to include a evaluation of the winter one possession limit regulations, but that can also be saved for a later discussion of the 2026 implementation plan.
We could postpone that discussion until the 2026 implementation plan discussion is what Chris recommended. Does anyone have any heartburn over that? Because if I don't eat in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to have a massive heartburn that I'm going to need to take care of. So yeah, if everyone here is okay with having that discussion as part of a bigger picture for 2026, we can postpone that for now. That would start in October. Okay, but I'm hearing that there's opportunity that we can integrate the board into that discussion as well. We'll figure it out. Okay, anything else, Hayden?
I think Eric Reed might have an additional question. No? Okay. Yeah, nothing else from me.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all very much. We're going to take a break for lunch. Let's go an hour. We'll come back at 1:30 and we'll pick up with black sea bass. Enjoy lunch.